What's in this book? The testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Revelation 19:10, King James Version. There are two significant additions to this edition of this book. They are in the appendix. The first is a letter written by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to me in 1966. In it, he expressed his conviction that by divine help, he would escape a particular death plot that he would one day face. In a previous edition of this book, published in 2001, I made reference to this letter in the last chapter of this book. I did not have it then. However, on June 27, 2002, one was very surprised and very happy to receive a phone call that a copy of that letter was to be faxed to me later that day. That letter is now contained in this book. This edition also contains a statement by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan expressing his view of this letter's value. He made it on June 5, 2006 while answering questions from me for Closing the Gap. Jabril Muhammad, January 29, 2007. Originally, this book was a letter. I began it on December 25, 1976. The person for whom it was being written was Dr. Abdul Salam. By the end of that day, I had carefully written 2 pages. The next day, I decided to make it part of the appendix of a book I had already written. I started that book on November 1, 1972, wrote the last chapter of it in October 1973. Later, towards the end of 1974, one determined, by the help of Allah, to get it into the hands of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. So I continued this letter in 1976, with Minister Farrakhan in mind. When the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and I met in 1977, one had deliberately put the book in one folder and the letter, which was part of its appendix, into another one. Both were in a brown shopping bag. He read the book but rejected the shorter writing at that time. I expected that. But he was up and on his job. His first major step is what mattered at that time. I was satisfied, extremely happy, relieved and tired. God himself and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad were with my brother's mind and heart. Therefore, I was confident that he would do what was written of him for our people, our red people, and others. I knew, thanks to Allah, that he had the backing of both Allah and his Christ. To me, this meant they would take him to higher and even higher stages until he reached the pinnacle of success. Yes, and honor too, in this world. Furthermore, I was also confident that he would one day meet in person with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Many people skip past introductions or forwards to books. Please don't do that in this case. You'll find that this material you are now reading is essential to a fuller understanding of this book, which the Honorable Louis Farrakhan finally read in 1980. That's why this begins on page 1. After this comes the introduction to the second printing of this effort, which was in 1989. Then comes the introduction to the first printing of this book, which was in 1983. That was the letter that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan read in the latter part of 1980 and led to his announcement that his teacher was indeed alive. Both are slightly edited in a few spots for increased clarity. This is followed by a part of an interview I conducted with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in March 1994. In this interview, he speaks about his experience with this material and its impact on him. Afterwards comes the text of that which he read in 1980. In 19,761 had given it the long title, On the Possibility of the Escape from a Death Plot by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Messenger of Allah. The next section contains another excerpt from the March 1994 interview with Minister Farrakhan mentioned above. He answered a question that pertains to the ultimate value of his realization that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is physically alive. What an answer he gave. This is followed by my answer to a question put to Minister Farrakhan by Emerge magazine in a 1990 interview. The question was about the lack of a definite title to the book I gave to Minister Farrakhan in 1900. And 77.1 explain how this relates to the missions of both the minister and his teacher, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. This book closes with an excerpt from an unpublished book titled, Where is the Honorable Elijah Muhammad? This excerpt focuses on a conversation I had with him in October 1967 about his departure to his teacher, Master Fard Muhammad. Jabril Muhammad, Phoenix, Arizona, January 31, 1997. P.S. It's now April 7, 2001. Finally, this book is being made available to those who want it, in a way that I did not expect just 3 months ago, which is via the internet and by means of CDs. Those who helped make this happen are acknowledged elsewhere in this book. To update on the possibility, 1989. It has been about 13 years since I wrote the letter, first to a dear brother, and then to Minister Farrakhan, which became this book approximately 7 years ago. I never sent that letter to the one for whom I first intended it. However, I eventually gave him the letter in book form. That brother is the esteemed and respected dentist, Dr. Abdul Salam of Chicago, Illinois. I decided to mention his name at this time because his expertise is relevant to the extremely important issue of whether or not the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is physically alive. The importance of that issue has been publicly heightened by means of the vision from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to Minister Louis Farrakhan on September 17, 1985, and the minister's report of it to America and the world. Hopefully, the relevance of Dr. Salam's expertise will become clearer when we come to Minister Farrakhan's first public announcement in 1981 that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was and is alive. A few pages from now, that vision was relevant to a press conference for which Minister Farrakhan was the spokesman, which was held in Washington, D.C., February 5, 1986. Later that night, Minister Farrakhan began his world tour. It was his growing understanding of that vision that led Minister Farrakhan to alter his itinerary after he had visited a few countries in Africa. The Spirit of Allah moved him to go to Libya. On the basis of that vision, Minister Farrakhan delivered a powerful speech on March 16, 1986, in Tripoli, Libya. Before representatives of approximately 80 nations, he warned the then-President, Mr. Ronald Reagan. At that time, President Reagan was the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the most powerful government of the Caucasian race, the United States of America. He warned President Reagan not to make war on Libya. He issued this warning from an authority superior to that which fueled the decision of Mr. Reagan and those with him to make war on Libya. At a certain point in that 1986 speech, he stated, on the night of September 17th, in a little village in Mexico, Allah gave me a vision, which involved Mr. Reagan sitting with the Joint Chiefs of Staff to plan a war. I did not know where the war was, but it is clear to me that with the ships of the 6th Fleet in the waters of the Gulf of Sidra, that Mr. Reagan and the Joint Chiefs of Staff have planned to make war on Libya to destroy the fruit of the El Fatiha revolution. For the sake of his servant, Minister Farrakhan, and for the sake of an unwary general public, God himself saw to it that the truth of the minister's statement was confirmed in a powerful and public manner. Here, in brief, is part of how it happened. In 1987, the news that President Reagan and the Joint Chiefs of Staff had secretly planned a war against Libya a few weeks before the minister received his vision became public through the New York Times news services, the Washington Post, and the Atlanta Journal. This news spread throughout America and the world, thus publicly verifying Minister Farrakhan's powerful experience. Minister Farrakhan's vision occurred the night of September 17, 1985. 4 years later, in September 1989, Minister Farrakhan came to see that he had yet to hold that press conference which the Honorable Elijah Muhammad wanted him to hold in Washington, D.C. So he held that press conference in that city to reveal that plan, or plot, which involves the assassination of the minister himself and the wholesale murder of black people in this country by President Bush and his J-bin Chiefs of Staff. Was everyone who was involved, or was to be brought into this plot, equally aware of the specifics? Only those who hatched it, and Allah and his highly placed angels, know for sure. I urge the reader to get a copy of The Comer by Night by Sister Tanetta Muhammad and Farrakhan, God's Man on the Straight Path, by Jabril Muhammad, which should be available in early 1990, as well as the various speeches made by the minister, and back issues of the Final Call newspaper, all of which contain vital information pertaining to and verifying the extremely significant spiritual plus experience of the minister and its profound practical value for us all. It is, of course, beyond the purpose of this introduction to this little book to go into those details necessary for the best understanding of the vision of Minister Farrakhan and how it relates to the fact that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is alive, is well, is in power, and is doing that which was written that he would do even as you read these words. The reason I have decided to mention Dr. Salam's name at this time, in this context, is because he is one of the two dentists whom Minister Farrakhan mentioned during his Savior's Day address in February 1981. In that address, he announced publicly for the first time his conviction that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had escaped a death plot in 1975 and was with Master Fard Muhammad. In the eyes of many people, Minister Farrakhan staked his reputation and risked being thought of as insane. He opened himself to public mockery by announcing that he had come to believe that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was alive, even though he believed that he had seen his teacher's body in a coffin at the end of February 1975. Nevertheless, he stated not only his conviction, but he offered to pay whatever costs were required to have the buried body, said to be that of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, exhumed. He mentioned that there were two dentists who had dental records, which would verify whether or not the body in the ground was that of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Dr. Abdul Salam is one of the two dentists. Moreover, the minister announced that if it was truthfully determined that the body in the ground, reported to be that of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, was in fact his, he would stop teaching. It is one thing to say that you believe the Honorable Elijah Muhammad died of natural causes in 1975. It is quite another thing to say that there was a death plot, and that it succeeded. If there was a plot, and if it was successful, then murder took place. If there was a plot which did not succeed, did it fail because he died of natural causes before it was put into effect? Or, if it failed, was there another reason? We would agree, no doubt, that it is still quite another thing to say that not only was there a death plot, but that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad escaped it, was restored to full health, and is with Master Fard Muhammad on that huge wheel-like plane that is even now flying over our heads. Add to this that he knows who the plotters were, and knows those who have joined their ranks to plot against Minister Farrakhan, his followers, and the black nation generally, since then, and is doing something about it, with both mercy and firmness. Furthermore, Minister Farrakhan's experience in Mexico was next to actually seeing him in his physical body. He has publicly stated that in this experience, he heard the voice of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad on the wheel, Mother of Plains, and was told by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad that which he has told the world. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan first understood what he was told by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to refer to President Reagan, etc. as sketched above. Minister Farrakhan had no way of learning of the secret plotting of this government, nor did they leak their evil secret to him. Later, according to the ways of Allah, Minister Farrakhan came to see that what happened to Libya was a sign of what the current president, Mr. Bush, and his co-conspirators have already plotted against the minister and black people of America. Minister Farrakhan is an honorable man, sincerely motivated, totally committed to the rise of his people in particular, and humanity in general. Moreover, he is certainly not insane. He stated, in his October 24, 1989 press conference, that God would show a sign of the truth of his press statement. God did. The day following his press conference, a UFO was seen over Washington, D.C. That UFO was a sign from God. It was shown on television in Washington, D.C. for the 3 days that followed his press conference. President Bush, his staff, and the general public in that city, which includes representatives of the nations of the earth, had access to the full text of Minister Farrakhan's statement. It was printed in full in the Washington Times. Excerpts appeared in the Washington Post. The entire audio of his statement was aired on radio. Minister Farrakhan ended his statement to the press with these words: "This is a final warning to you. The ball is now in your court. You may do with it, with me, and with us, as you see fit. Thank you for your attention, and may Allah bless each of you with the light of understanding as I greet you in peace. Assalamu alaikum." They read it. They heard it. They were aware of the UFO sighting. When reporters questioned the White House on the minister's press statement, they did not mock him, nor did they brush him off. They said in public, no comment certainly. Many of us heard the Honorable Elijah Muhammad state that he would one day be with the God who raised him up, and that he would return. The majority of us who heard these statements heard him give them in a general form. How much we understood depended on what God had blessed us to understand up to that point. On the other hand, a much smaller number of us heard him at his dinner table or elsewhere state certain specifics which others did not hear on this subject. Many of us, including myself throughout America, have been blessed with visions of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad since he departed. However, nobody's vision of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is equal in overall significance, value, import, power, and weight, or in relevance to the end of this world and the establishment of God's new world, as that which Minister Louis Farrakhan received on September 17, 1985. This vision demonstrates the high quality of the minister's closeness to Allah and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. This closeness is due to his sterling character, dedication, and excellent works. His vision is an extremely important divine communication, as it concerns the truth of the status and whereabouts of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the destiny of God's people, and the fate of America. It was actually more than a vision. Try to put yourself in Minister Farrakhan's shoes for a moment. Imagine that you have studied, followed, and worked for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad for 20 years. You've heard him speak, not of his death, but of his going to Master Fard Muhammad alive. He gives you instructions that seem meaningless if he dies before that blessed second meeting. All of a sudden, you are told, on the morning of February 25, 1975, that your leader and teacher is dead. What effect would that have on your mind if you were in the minister's shoes? Remember, he was the national spokesman of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. His voice was heard all over the earth. What do you say to the believers and to the world? Then imagine seeing a body, a few days later, which you have every reason to think was your leader, in a casket. Then 30 months later, out of sheer love for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, his people, his teachings, his works, and his program, you decide to make an announcement to the world that may cost you your life and the lives of your loved ones. You decide to lift the name of your teacher and build on the foundation he left in order to raise your people up from their degraded condition to a superior state of life. That was September 1977. It's now November 1977. You publicly announce your intentions to lift the name of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and rebuild the Nation of Islam. Time passes. You now have very few friends and relatives with you, to a certain extent. At that point, they don't see as fully as you do. Your resources are between extremely slim and none. You have faith in Allah and in the word of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. However, you still believe your teacher is dead and that you will never see him again. Different aspects of the words and deeds of your teacher are coming back to you. You are moving strictly on his word and its spirit. You are faced with skepticism and doubt from those who love the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. More than that, you are faced with the hatred of many of those who claim or really do love the man you love, but hate you out of misunderstanding and reject your effort to lift his name, to awaken black people and to set them on the right course to him. The American government, other governments, various groups, as well as hypocrites. All of these oppose you. These powers seek every means possible to discredit you, as they ultimately planned and worked for the destruction of that which you now seek to resurrect and represent. Your life is threatened, several times. Huge bribe offers are made to you. Some of these evil offers are in the thousands, others are into the hundreds of millions of dollars. These bribers urge, even appeal to you, to go and work for your people. They say that you are a leader in your own right, but, they add, just don't do your work with the name of Elijah Muhammad. They want you to leave his name out of your effort. They don't want his name to be remembered. You are broke. But you vehemently reject them all and their money. Some you tell to go to hell, and then some. Time passes. It's now 1980. You finally read the letter your brother asked you to read. You begin to entertain the thought of the possibility of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad being alive. Statements and testimonies of varying quality and importance continue to come to you as you continue to reflect over your personal interaction with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad over 20 years and the things you heard him say. Then finally, it all crystallizes. You become 100% convinced, primarily on the basis of the Word of God, and to a somewhat lesser extent on powerful circumstantial evidence, that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is alive. You come to see that you have a profound obligation to state this conviction publicly, so you decide to do it Savior's Day 1981. You know you may be looked at by both friends and enemies as crazy or as an opportunist. Nevertheless, you must do what you must do. On February 22, 1981, you do it before about 3,000 people. You do it in Chicago, 6 years or 72 months after it was told to the world that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was dead. Time passes. Others continue to get varying communications and visions that involve the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and sometimes even of Master Fard Muhammad. But not you. You don't even get a wisp of a dream. Nothing. But you are the man at the point. You are the one the world is looking at, as you say and do what you say and do. You are the one both friend and foe are focused on. Time passes. Now it is 1984. Many Jews are on your case. Other detractors intensify their efforts against you too. The number of those who openly oppose you increases daily. You are lied on and mocked night and day. Enemies seek every means to multiply the ongoing efforts to ruin you. They work to make a climate in which you can be killed, and the public would think that God's will was being done. Time passes. Now it's 1985. The intensity of the attacks on you as a person and/or those whom you are guiding widens, increases, and intensifies. The desire in you to receive some kind of word or sign escalates. If not a vision, at least some kind of dream. Something, anything. You desire a more concrete contact from your Lord. Then one night, on September 17, 1985, in a tiny village in Mexico, you are taken up in that which is more than a vision. You are taken or escorted on one of the little planes to the big plane, that huge wheel, like plane up in the skies. While in the big plane, or wheel-like plane, you hear the voice of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, a voice you know very well, having heard that voice for 20 consecutive years. There you receive instructions from him about a murderously evil plot that the President and the Joint Chiefs of Staff have planned. Finally, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad tells you to let the world know in a press conference that you received this information from him on the wheel. To those who would say that the vision granted to Minister Louis Farrakhan was solely the product of his yearning or craving for communication from his teacher, I ask, was Mr. Reagan's war and murder of Libyans also the product of the minister's yearning or craving? Was not Reagan's attack on the Libyan people real? Did it not happen? Has it not been established beyond all shadow of a doubt that Mr. Reagan planned this war with others a few weeks before the minister's vision? This set of facts alone absolutely confirms the truth of the vision and the integrity and sanity of the minister for those who needed it. Furthermore, the vision confirms the fact that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is alive and the mother plane is real. And it tells us much more. What kind of courage, what kind of dedication, what kind of strength, what kind of purity would a man have to have attained to carry out such a stupendous assignment from a man whom the world thinks is dead? All I am asking the reader of this little and limited book to do is to consider the possibility that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is alive. This is reasonable, especially in the light of the profound experience of the minister's vision that really affects everyone, in one way or another. Something of the greatest magnitude is about to happen. I sincerely hope that this little work contributes to our collective realization of the truth of what has and is coming from the presence of God. That which is coming is related to Minister Farrakhan's realization that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is alive. I thank Brother James 10X Hudson of Muhammad Mosque in 7, New York City, with all my heart for his efforts in bringing out the second printing of this book. I thank Sister Marguerite X. McCrae for typing and proofing this important part of this book, and I thank her husband, Brother Charles X. McCrae, for allowing her to help me. And I thank you, whoever you may be, for taking the time to read this little book. Jabril Muhammad, Phoenix, Arizona, December 19, 1989, P.S. It has been about 14 years since I wrote the letter that forms the text of this little book. I've been blessed to learn much since then. However, that information is not contained nor reflected in this letter book. Be it the will of Allah, it will appear in Smother Book. Please consider the fourth paragraph in the text where I wrote, I won't cover all that I know or think that could or should be written on this vast, vital, and explosive subject. That would require a book. This is not that book. I do hope, however, that everything that is written in this little book stimulates deeper than usual thought on Jesus. This P.S. is being written while I'm in Saudi Arabia, as a part of Minister Louis Farrakhan's delegation, as he and the scholars discuss religion. Be sure to obtain the Final Call newspaper for details, or back issues, as the case may be. I'm writing this P.S. due to what has crystallized for me while we are in Medina during this wonderful journey. It pertains to the relevance of the truth of Jesus, to the ultimate resolution of the problems that horned the division of Muhammad's followers into the Sunni and Shia divisions. Let us consider that among the beliefs held by Muslims is that Jesus is to return alive. This is also believed, of course, by the Christians the world over, including the United States of America. Where is the place on this earth where Jesus will first appear? Will he first appear in the Middle East or in the United States of America? Let us think over the fact that about 2 billion or so Christians and Muslims are all looking for Jesus, or at least the return of Jesus. This is part of the study of the religious leaders and many of the followers of both groups. At what point will the leaders of both groups really get down to the business of deeply preparing these 2 or so billion people for his return? That business is the work of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. This little book concerns that serious business. Thank you for reading this. Jabril Muhammad, Medina, Saudi Arabia, December 26, 1989. In introduction, 1983. Among the main facts one should know about any communication, especially one of significance, whether it is spoken or written, are 1. The premise, 2. The intention, 3. The context. To put it another way, regardless to the means by which information is conveyed or given, the more we know of the reason, the why or the motive for it, and the circumstances involved in its production, the better we can understand and properly use the information presented to us. The material that follows this introduction began as a letter. It was started December 2005, 1975. It was written over a number of days and was completed on the 21st day of January, 1976. A P.S. to it was written 5 days later. Early in its writing, I decided to make it a part of a manuscript that was already written. So, I put it into that book's appendix. I thought to publish it for a while, but an event in 1974 removed that thought. So, that book has not been published, in the formal sense of the word. This is why it never occurred to me to publish this writing, which forms the heart of this book, as it was originally a letter, which I finally decided to give to Minister Farrakhan. I had done that. So to me, that was that. So I thought not to publish it. One day in 1982, Minister Farrakhan opened a discussion with me about publishing this work. He told me of the value it could have to others. Minister Farrakhan is the one that Allah himself prepared for the Honorable Elijah Muhammad for a very extraordinary assignment. It was by Allah's guidance that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad appointed Minister Louis Farrakhan to sit in his seat. So, I am honored that he asked me to publish this work, and I am honored and humbled to present it to the public. Here is the best way to read this writing. First, read it through 2 or 3 times within a week or so. Do it quickly. Do not let too much time go by between your readings of the whole. That is, try to do each reading of the whole in one sitting, if you can. Then, read it more carefully. This last type of reading may take several days. Now, for the sake of clarity and in the interest of communication, the reader is asked to look at my intent and the premise of this writing. Now that I have conveyed something of the context, I say something of, as you will take note of when I wrote this material by the dates. It is beyond the scope of this introduction to go into the circumstances of that time. It was, however, written during a very dark time for the lovers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. In fact, the Nation of Islam at that time was destroyed. As the world knows, Minister Louis Farrakhan has brought about a change of that context since 1977 by the direct backing of Allah, in the person of Master Fard Muhammad and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who is the exalted Christ. My intent, I hope, is exceedingly clear from the words I used in the second paragraph of this material or book, which follows this introduction. Now, for a major part of the premise, if one was aware of the full range of what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught of and about Allah's special servants, it would be dear why I, as any follower of his word, see such men as Abraham, Lot, Noah, Moses, and others, including Jesus and Muhammad, as those whose lives and works reflects for us the life and work of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. They were types or signs of himself. So it would be natural for such a believer in him, such as myself, to see that the fates of those men as giving us insight into the fate of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. February 25, 1975. For example, in the 8th chapter of This Is the One, are these words, "The same man that the God makes his forerunner is the same man through whom God brings in his new world." As there were 2 phases of Moses' work, there are 2 phases of the work of the man like Moses' messenger Elijah Muhammad. Moses liberated his people from the bondage of Pharaoh and his people. But he did not have that which could bring the ex-slaves success in the country or land where they were going. So the scriptures teach us that Moses had to go up to the mountain and meet God again. He had to meet God again to get that which he and the people had to have in order to be successful in the promised land. In that land, they were to become independent. So they went on for a while. Then God gave it to Moses at the proper time. Except for the words messenger Elijah Muhammad. The words in the second paragraph I've just quoted are the exact words the Honorable Elijah Muhammad actually gave to me for what later came to be This Is the One, as we sat having coffee one day in October 1967. This occurred a few days after our first discussion that led to that book's writing. I wrote down his words exactly as he gave them to me. They are filled with meaning. Elsewhere in that same chapter from This Is the One I wrote, the last messenger is pictured in the 5th chapter of Revelation as a lamb in the midst of beasts. This could not be a prophecy of Muhammad in Arabia 1,400 years ago. There were no people that held the Arabs in slavery. So unless the scholars of the Islamic world want to say that the Arabs were the people that the books pictured as the beasts, they should agree that Muhammad of Arabia could not have fulfilled what is written of the Lamb. Revelation says that the God has a book in his right hand that is sealed. No one was worthy to open and read this book, neither to look on it, except one man. This man, under the symbolic name of Lamb, is very wise. Verse 6. The 7th verse says he went right up to God and took this sealed book from the God. Powerful man. This wisdom given the Lamb confounds the beasts. Even the 24 scientists, the writers of our histories, bow down to the Lamb. Everybody bows except the Lamb's teacher. This was no brilliant or special insight of my own. I have never had an original thought in my life. The ability to generate totally new thoughts is to be taught later in the hereafter. High fact, let me stop right here and ask the reader to ponder these words from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in that same book, which he also gave me that same afternoon. These words pertain to the future when men and women will be taught how to produce what we now call ideas. Ideas are that horn which everything comes. On this subject of ideas, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave me these words, which appear on page 128 of the 3rd edition of This Is the One. He aims not only to reveal his ideas for the present creation of the universe, but also to give to man the nature and the creative wisdom to produce creative ideas as the father of civilization. This is what was prophesied, that God would make man like himself. He aims to make the nation of righteousness, who will rule in the hereafter, with the potential knowledge of producing and bringing into action or existence that which he has been able to produce. We call this ideas. He aims to make each one into a God. Now Moses' life did not end when he went up in the mountain to meet God for the second time. After he came down and found the people involved in calf worship, he had to go back to God in order to get a second set of the laws, which God gave him on his first trip. Nor did such trips end, as it was necessary for him to go up to meet God a third time. This third trip has a profound bearing on very significant events that are happening now, which involve Minister Farrakhan, and that are yet to take place in these days of the establishment of God's complete rule. His Moses' second meeting with God corresponds to the Jesus ascending up to heaven and getting that book from God, Revelation chapter 5. Even this is on more than one level and refers to more than one person, as Moses met with God a third time to get a copy of the first set of instructions, wisdom. Most people ignore this third trip. The Jesus who got the book from him who was on the throne was not the Jesus who lived 2,000 years ago. The Lamb in the 5th chapter of Revelation refers to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. This fact is a part of the 75% of what we read about Jesus in the Bible, which really refers to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. If this is so, and it is, then it also follows that what we read of Jesus' escape from death on the cross refers to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his escape from a death plot in 1975. From the perspective I share with others, his escape was also foreshadowed in the escape of Muhammad from Mecca to Medina, and it goes deeper yet. If we carefully consider what follows, it helps us to more deeply and accurately estimate the mind, heart, and commitment of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan to his teacher and what he brought to us and the world. One more word. Be sure you own copies of and listen to Minister Louis Farrakhan's Savior's Day speeches of 1981, 1982, and 1983. These will help you immeasurably as you come to grip with what follows and its implications. Jabril Muhammad, Phoenix, Arizona, January 23, 1983. TV Minister Farrakhan and this book, and the weakness of God is stronger than men, and base things of the world and things which are despised, hath God chosen, yea, and things which are not, to bring to naught things that are, that no flesh should glory boast in his presence. I Corinthians 1, 250-2830. So also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption. It is raised in corruption. It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. I Corinthians 15, 4243. And he said unto me, My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. 1 Corinthians 12:9. For though he was crucified through weakness, yet he liveth by the power of God. 1 Corinthians 13:4. A dear sign of this world's end is the ever-increasing number of people who gain a distorted inner satisfaction in speaking and or writing about other people with malice. On matters of importance, they speak and write out of arrogance, spite, and from the spirit of contentiousness. Furthermore, far too many seem increasingly unwilling to make the required effort to justify their views, especially those unfavorable to others, before putting their views before the public. This has contributed to an ever-increasing measure of the most dangerous series of misunderstandings, mistakes, and errors. Moreover, this spirit of contentiousness has finally led to the most dangerous series of conflicts with the ultimate source of reality, the divine supreme being himself, on whom all of our lives depend. This spirit of contentiousness, born of egotism, is manifested in all forms of insults, slander, and libel of the worst kind against others who are upholding the word of God. God himself is at the root of the displeasure of those who love this world's life and are doing all they can to preserve it. This is leading to the deadest of all situations, which spells ruin and death on a scale never witnessed before. It's called Armageddon. Even in relatively insignificant matters, this set of evils involving slander, jealousy, and envy are increasingly evident. This is all related to the fact that slander was originally used by the wicked to get their start among the righteous 6,000 years ago in the Holy Lands. Slander, according to the Holy Quran, was to be and is now being used by them to try to overcome the aims and purposes of the great Mahdi, Master Fard Muhammad, who has recently made his appearance and revealed himself. Slander is being used now by the wicked to try to defeat the righteous now, at the end of their evil rule and world. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad once said that disagreement is like a lighted fuse. He was referring to a law of nature. The more intense that these hostilities develop among people, in the very nature of things, the closer we get to the most terrific of all explosions. Every indicator points to it. The increase of these evils are plunging the nations of the earth into the most terrible of all wars, Armageddon. Of this time of the ending of this wicked world, the Revelator was divinely made to see. 3 unclean spirits like frogs come from the mouth of the dragon, from the mouth of the beast, and from the mouth of the false prophet. These were demonic spirits who performed signs. They went out to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for the battle on the great day of God the Almighty. Revelation 16, 1314. This is being fulfilled at this very moment. Again, that battle is Armageddon. So many people still do not realize that it is out of the mercy of Allah that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has come and works. He has been making the most valiant attempt to defuse this situation, at its core, before it is too late, despite what his critics claim and do. This is not to say that things won't get better. Conditions will become universally better, even supremely better. But that won't come until after conditions degrade to that which is absolutely the worst of all wars, due to the wickedness of extreme selfishness of the opposers of Allah. Now, this does not refer to those who unintentionally make momentary private or public mistakes in their judgments of the views and positions of others. Such happens to the best of us. I am referring to those who feel that it is in their interests to distort the plainly stated views of others and to deliberately misrepresent the words and motives of others with whom they have differences. However, to distort the words of God, through His servants, especially when He is present, that is fatal. If, to some degree, we become an expert in any area of learning, and then proceed to set forth our learning to the public, we are obligated to try to make certain that we have the truth. Furthermore, we must make every effort to tell that truth. Otherwise, others become misled, and, to one degree or another, many are harmed, or worse, through misinformation. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad cited Hosea 4:6, wherein God stated that my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. This is the time referred to in Hosea. This destruction is tragic because it is so unnecessary, as He, the Divine Supreme Being, has revealed the greatest of all knowledge, even to its root. He revealed what He revealed, of His own supreme wisdom, to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Further, He provided the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and us all, with a man especially gifted by God with the power of clear expression, Minister Farrakhan. He has made the truth so clear that not even fools can excuse themselves and claim that they don't understand what he teaches. Even so, there are those who deliberately distort the plain view or the reality of others, even of God Himself. This is the way things naturally are, more often than not, by those ill-affected by the spirit of this wicked and insane world. This is especially so in America. So, the large number of people who pose as experts or authorities in different areas of knowledge, but who in fact are frauds, are contributing to the fall of the very world they love, while they perceive not. This and more occurred to me one day, as I read several distorted observations about this little book and my purpose for writing it. Not one of these persons have ever asked me for the facts, or at least my own views of my own experience in connection with what I wrote. Respecting the possibility that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is physically alive, at least they would have been in a better position to argue against my view, which is about a matter of the greatest importance, and which, therefore, merits our best effort to grasp it. In fact, I have not met one of these critics, nor have I ever been contacted by any of them. Yet they wrote about that of which they were ignorant. The author of one book wrote that the long letter, of which this book is primarily composed, was originally a series of articles I wrote in an effort to prove that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was alive. That author did mention the newspaper, or whatever, in which this series allegedly appeared. He could not, because I've never written such material as a series in any newspaper. He had to know that he was not telling the truth. So under the guise of honest disagreement, he sought to disguise the malice of his spirit, as he distorted the intent and the facts of my effort. He set up the straw man argument, which is a fallacy. Such an argument occurs when one claims another made a point, or an argument, which the other never made. Then they knock down the one point, or the argument the other never made, which in fact was their own invention. They then claim a victory by defeating the falsity of the arguments or the position the other never made. Even so, such a victory rests on falsehood. They feel secure that the public, their unsuspecting readership, won't ever know the truth. So this particular writer set up that which I never said and presented what I did not write. He then refuted that which he claimed I wrote. Finally, he then claimed a victory. Such efforts will ultimately fail. I've seen some of the writings of others, including those who claim to be Muslims, who have taken material from the book This Is the One and have presented it as their original thought. That does not bother me, in a personal sense. What does bother me is that they have pulled out and distorted passages that included words of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, which he told me to put in that book, as though it was from myself. If they had contacted me, I would have gladly given them the spirit, eye, and fuller context of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's words and more. After he departed, I publicly identified the words he gave me for this book, for I did not want to take any credit for the extraordinary wisdom his words contained. It is interesting to note that these same people refuse to acknowledge that the Honorable Louis Farrakhan is the man whom the Honorable Elijah Muhammad designated to sit in his seat in his absence. I believe there is a profound relationship between their distortion of the words of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, whom they claim to represent, and their negative attitude towards Minister Farrakhan. This is the time, however, of the end of this world of falsehood. The saying will prove true: one can fool all of the people some of the time, but not all of the people all of the time. Like so many others who oppose the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, as they now oppose the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Such efforts or writings remind me of the words of the Muslim scholar I quoted in the book, This is the One, Volume 1. Here are his words. In his book, The Ideal Prophet, Kamal ud-Din certainly expressed the truth when he observed that there is nothing so inexpressibly mean and sordid in trying to advance one's religious beliefs by telling deliberate falsehoods about another religion. The Christian missionary is the worst sinner in this respect. He does not even spare his own prophets, and I, for one, failed to understand his mentality. We now understand this mentality. Further on in his introduction, this scholar points out their method in dealing with Islam. They have a novel system of recording actualities, for they know that they cannot appeal to facts in history. The force of repetition stands with them as the equivalent of proof. To repeat certain statements while ignoring rebutting facts is a sure method of carrying conviction to the minds of thousands. These writers have adopted this plan. They play upon the mob psychology and produce the desired effect. In writing against other religions, the popular course is this. First of all, one writer says something by way of suggestion or insinuation. The next after him declares the suggestion a possibility. The possibility then is converted into a theory by a third writer, while the fourth tries to make a fact out of the theory. Thus a wish in 4 or 5 metamorphoses becomes a well-established fact, especially when other religions or civilizations come under their criticism. What about those of us who claim to be Muslims, who feel the need to slander or commit libel to advance our positions? Are they any better than those whom they condemned? Among the writers whom I am referring to are those who call themselves Muslims, who, like other writers on the Nation of Islam, have scholarly credentials. However, rather than to deal honestly in their efforts to refute the position of this book, they chose to travel the low road, the road of Satan, in order to get the best from the material, which comes below. The reader must understand that I did not originally write it with the intention of making it a public writing. It was written to brothers, both of whom I knew were well acquainted with the teachings and position of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad on the matters contained therein. My respect for their knowledge allowed me to write what I did without having to cover all that could have been written. Naturally, whenever we communicate to someone with whom we share the same body of knowledge, we simply don't detail everything, which we feel we must do when communicating with others who don't know what we know in a certain area of knowledge. Additionally, this work was more to suggest a possibility, rather than to convince my intended reader of the physical state of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. This work, therefore, ought to be read in this light. Let us now consider some of the views of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan about this book. He expressed some of his views about this writing in an interview with me, which began on March 6, 1994. At a certain point, well into the interview, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan stated, "In September of 1977, one met with Jabril Muhammad. He gave me a book that he had written on the life of Jesus and its relevance to our struggle. After reading that book, I returned to my faith and belief in Master Fard Muhammad and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and was further convinced that I had to go to work to rebuild the work of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. On the first day of our meeting, author's note, September 1977, and before I read his book, I was telling Brother Jabril of my reaction to watching the funeral cortege of Dr. Martin Luther King. As I watched the funeral cortege on TV, tears welled up in my eyes as I pondered why great men are not given their due or recognition while they are alive. I told Brother Jabril that I later brought this question up with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He said that when death comes to a person, it puts a period to their life and work. Only then can we assess their life and works. In the course of these remarks, containing the insights given to me by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I referred to him as dead. When I mentioned Elijah Muhammad as dead, Brother Jabril said softly, "No, brother, he is not dead." In my mind, I said, "Oh, this poor brother loves him so much that he can't bear the thought that Elijah Muhammad is gone." So I looked at him and said, "Well, whether he's dead or not, he's certainly not here, and so the work of rebuilding is on us." He agreed, and there was no further discussion of that subject at that time. Before going further with Minister Farrakhan's words, Here is why I mention my conviction about the state of being of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, as I did, and when I did, to my dear brother, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. First, I knew he was not going to accept that observation at that time. At this point in our meeting, he did not know my real purpose for visiting him. Next, I was positive that he would come to see that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was alive at some point, for this was written of him. I knew something of his future. Again, he did not know what was in that brown paper bag, which, at a certain point in 1974, Allah made me to know I had written for him. He knew nothing, from my perspective, of what led to our meeting in Hollywood, on the 12th floor, in that hotel room on that fateful day in September 1977. This was exactly as it should have been. It is beyond the scope of this writing to get into how I came to know when it was the time for him to arise and to raise an entire nation and then some. The main thing was that it was the time for him to make the first major step. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad was now about to return to the people through Minister Farrakhan. We have a picture of this in the Bible where Jesus guided Paul from where he was at the right hand of God in heaven. Likewise, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad guided Minister Farrakhan from where he was. Some misunderstood, some still do. That's life. Over the past 19 years, I have heard Minister Farrakhan speak of our meeting in 1977. I've not said as much as he has of it. I don't like the kind of attention it brings to me. However, I have an obligation to share it, especially since there are so many so-called experts on the minister who don't know their subject, but speak and write in public anyway in ways that misrepresent him. What the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said in that March 1994 interview is what he said in September 1977. He did say, well, whether he's dead or not, he's certainly not here, and so the work of rebuilding is on us. I smiled. He then raised a question about how I thought this work ought to begin. That was it. It was these two sets of words I was waiting for. I stood up and respectfully said that I would not have anything more to say until he read the book I had brought for him. I extended my hand to shake his, as he smiled that beautiful smile of his, and as we shook hands he said, "All right." I left. I saw him a few times over the next few days. On the third day he arose. The rest, as it is said, is history. Let's return now to Minister Farrakhan's words. In the March 1994 interview, he continued, Jabril was to say it maybe a few more times to me, and he included this idea. Authors note that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was not dead, but all of that bounced off me because I, of course, had seen the body, and I believed that Elijah Muhammad was in fact dead. I remember when in Phoenix, Arizona, I was speaking at Arizona State University in 1978, and one of the sons of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Ishmael Muhammad, who is now my assistant minister here in Chicago, was very young at the time. We were in a private home where he and his brothers were being schooled by Sister Yolanda Muhammad. In his little classroom, he took me by the hand and I sat at one of the little desks. He said to me, "Brother Minister, you do believe that my father is alive, don't you?" I said, "No, Ishmael, I don't believe that he is alive. But don't worry about that because if he is alive, I am sure that he will make me to know and understand it at some point. But until that time, I will continue to do the work." He shook his head, rather disappointed, but I could not lie to him or anyone else about my thinking. Part of what influenced Minister Ishmael Muhammad's view was that he and his brother Rasul rejected the body they viewed at the funeral home as that of their father. The mole on the face of the body was on the wrong side. It was a while before each of them shared their private views of this seemingly unimportant fact with the other. Little things can mean a lot. So what was real, for example, to Minister Ishmael simply was not real for Minister Farrakhan when they had this discussion in 1978. I knew that this was not a reality for the minister on the first day, when we met in September 1977. Was not going to press that issue. However, I looked for an opportunity to simply say to him that his teacher was not dead, as when one plants a seed, even though I knew he was not ready to accept that at that time. I just wanted him to hear that his teacher was not dead before he read the book, because of what was in the book, and because of what I was convinced he would experience. I knew that this was a moment of extreme importance, that my brother come to see himself. He was much more than he thought he was. Eventually, he had to see how he related to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, not as he was when he departed, but as he was at that time, as alive and the man whom we call the risen Christ. I know this was to happen in stages. On the fourth day, or the day after he arose, I mentioned 4 things he would need in his work. These were also mentioned as seeds in the same spirit as the previous seed. I also mentioned these 4 things as I knew that he was the head of state, or a nation. I didn't, of course, mention this latter point. Minister Farrakhan continued in the interview. At some point, Brother Jabril for the second time gave me a copy of the writing, which was a letter that he had originally written to Dr. Abdul Salam concerning some of his views on the Honorable Elijah Muhammad not being dead, but rather physically alive. He first gave it to me when he gave me his book to read, in the hotel room, in September 1977. Briefly looked at it but put it aside as irrelevant, so I didn't bother to read it. He still wanted me to read it, but because I thought the subject matter was rather silly, I didn't bother to read it at all. I didn't want to insult or hurt Brother Jabril's feelings concerning my thinking, but I just did not believe that Elijah Muhammad was alive. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is very sensitive to the state of the feelings of others. However, he wasn't a mind reader. Smile. In that instance, however, he did not know that I had, and would suffer whatever I had to in order to help him through this phase of the divinely prescribed process he was undergoing, a most profound forward motion, both inward and outward, on his way to his Lord. So I continued to work and rebuild his work. I remember one day we were riding in my car. It was a white Lincoln Continental. Since I bought the car new in 1980, this had to be some time in 1980. He was in the car with me, in the back seat. He evidently found his writing in the car and in a greatly disheveled condition, ground into the mechanism that moves the front seat on the driver's side, which goes forward and backward. He took his writing and smoothed it out. When we went into my house, he put it on my coffee table and gently asked me to read it. This time I decided I would. In reading the material, particularly the scriptural references, certain things that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said to me began to make complete sense. In fact, the whole New Testament, after the I-4 Gospels, began to make very good sense to me. Then I became convinced that my father was indeed alive, and that Master Fard Muhammad had masterminded one of the most magnificent schemes to outmaneuver his enemies that had been known to the world at that time. In Minister Farrakhan's realization of the fact that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is in fact physically alive, we are provided with one of the greatest keys in unlocking the scriptures to our understanding. What was that plan? He took into consideration the plans of the enemy to get rid of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He allowed the enemy to believe that Elijah Muhammad had died. So many scholars talk about one substituted in the place of the Jesus. I won't go into my own thinking with respect to that. But if the enemy has long or recently known how to take one cell from a plant, or animal or human, and then make and extract it done, how much more does God and the holy wise scientists know of this? Did they in fact do something like this? When I considered all of the scriptures, when I considered his direct words to me, and when I considered other things I heard, for the first time during that time period, I then became convinced that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was in fact alive. Some months later, I remember being in the sitting room in my home on Damon, and Brother Jabril was sitting in one of die chairs, and we were preparing for Savior's Day 1981. I told him that I would announce at that Savior's Day conference that I believed that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was alive, was with his teacher, and was in power. I walked out of the room, but I happened to look either from the corner of my eye or over my shoulder, and I saw Brother Jabril exclaim, in body language, as one who had won a prize fight of great significance and throws his hands into the air as a sign of victory. I can only look back on that day and say that he was greatly overjoyed to know that in 41 months his brother had come, to see that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was in fact alive, and now would take the point and go before the world and proclaim his being alive. No matter how much scorn, abuse, or ridicule I would take, or how many friends I would lose by such announcement, I was convinced that I had to make that announcement and let the people start dealing with it first by ridicule. Then, as time progressed, they would gradually come to see the truth of that announcement. In February 1981, I made that announcement. I could say to the world, but I don't think that the world was listening. But to those who listened, particularly those who had come to believe and hope in me, I said that Elijah Muhammad was not dead, but was in fact alive. I never knew that my brother Minister Farrakhan saw my nonverbal reaction, with my arms raised in a victory, to his decision to tell the world, or at least those who would gather at the Savior's Day Convention, in 1981, that which Allah had blessed him to see. I didn't know he saw me doing that until he spoke those words in this interview of 1994. We'll leave this, for now, to resume another part of this interview later on in this book. Meanwhile, to more fully understand the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, it is very important to understand that it was already in him to lift the name of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his people, despite the circumstances of his life and the widest array of enemies that lined up against him. It is also necessary to understand the answer to a deeper question. What is the root of the why which was in him to do as he did, and when he did it? Both the Bible and Holy Quran teach that we ought not to judge according to appearances, but judge with a righteous judgment. This principle certainly relates to the life and work of Minister Farrakhan. He has been misunderstood by his critics. Their estimation or evaluation of his words and deeds are superficial. Therefore, they do not understand the spirit that propels him. This misunderstanding at best or evil rejection at worst of Minister Farrakhan affects one's views of other significant realities. However, it is written in John 11:2526 that Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live, and whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die." There is no man to whom this applies more than the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. On the possibility of the escape from a death plot by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Messenger of Allah, the above was the original title of What Comes Below, which was the letter I wrote, first with Dr. Abdul Salam in mind, and then, on the second day, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. It was later published, in 1983, under the title This Whole Book Carries. This comes to stimulate and deepen thought in an area of information dangerous to some, helpful to others, affecting everyone in America and throughout the world. My objective is only to show that there is something to the idea held by a few that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is not dead. This will be done by going to an area of information not looked at for one reason or another, even by 99% or more of those who love the messenger, whether or not they believe that he is yet alive and will return one day. That area of knowledge is described in the Bible and the Holy Quran. It concerns the death or fate of Jesus Isa. I hope to show that Jesus' fate, as described in the scriptures, is really teaching us and the world about what happened just before and after February 25, 1975. Before we plunge into the body of this writing, consider its limitations. I won't cover all that I know or think that could or should be written on this vast, vital, and explosive subject. That would require a book, and a lot of money and time. A good book on this subject would include, or deal with, the views of many wise people, both living and dead. There is no way to convince people, or even raise the idea of this letter to the level of a high probability, without getting into that which influences those same people. Such a book would have to cover many areas of the Bible and the Holy Quran that cannot be touched in a short piece like this. In addition, there are the hard facts of the views of those who were there in Chicago when it was announced that the messenger was dead. And don't forget, there are those who saw a body, which they state was beyond doubt that of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Then there is Wallace D. Muhammad. His views must be seriously studied. There is also at least 7 places in the Holy Quran where, in my view, Allah talks with his apostle about death. The Bible does the same. Finally, there is that which the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has said and written on this subject. There is no way to take up that without facing the fact that many understand his words differently than they did before the February 25, 1975. This is not a book. Furthermore, my aim is not to convince. My aim is just as I wrote above, in the first sentence of the second paragraph. Messenger Muhammad once wrote, "Of all the saints and prophets' death, there is more confusion over whether Jesus is dead or living than any man that ever lived on our planet Earth. Why?" The answer to his question, why, is complex and gets into that which is also the answer to the why of people and things that make up the universe. In other words, the ultimate answer rests in the mind of Allah himself. Misunderstanding and deceit are other less profound factors, which make for the confusion surrounding Jesus' death. Many people think Jesus was raised from the dead. They think he lives in the skies with God. Some think he never really died. The numbers of people who have thought this way, down through the centuries, runs into many billions. There may be over 2 billion who think this way even now. A large number of these people are non-Christians. Many others are convinced that Jesus died 2,000 years ago and is still dead. Christians are included in this group too. An examination of the views of those who think Jesus is alive and those who don't shows they have different ideas about God and his purpose. They also differ in their view of Jesus' relation to God. Christians see in Jesus the answers to the nature and purpose of God. Non-Christians do not find their answers satisfactory. For example, most Muslims see Isa as a prophet. Most Christians claim he is God. However, most Muslims, like Christians, believe Jesus to be in the skies, waiting for the proper time to return to earth. Even in this, there are vast differences. For instance, while most Christians expect Jesus to take them to heaven and put them in more power, the Muslims expect him to put them, the Christians, in hellfire. What really is the case? Is Jesus dead or not? If he escaped death on the cross, how? If he is dead, what sustains contrary ideas? Why has God Almighty permitted such confusion? What purpose in him does this serve? Can we go to the same controversial scriptures Muslims and Christians use and get a better answer than what they have? Even if it is better, can it be decisive? Can any answer be beyond doubt? Let us go to the Holy Quran. Why? It verifies the Bible's truth. Muslims understand that the Bible's teachings are such that it should be seen and judged or evaluated in the light of what the Holy Quran teaches. This includes, of course, Jesus' death. The following are the places in the Holy Quran concerning the fate or death of Jesus. If we go by the famous Muhammad Ali translation of the Holy Quran into English, those places are 351 to 54, 4, 157 to 159, 5, 116 to 118. These verses appear in the following larger context, referring to Jesus, 341 to 62, 4, 153 to 162, 5, 109 to 120. I'll use the English translations of 9 scholars. I'll also use some of their notes to enable you to get a clearer idea of what they saw. Going by the numbering of verses in the Muhammad Ali translation, we read in verse 51 that Jesus perceived disbelief on the part of those to whom he was preaching his message. From the context, one gets the distinct idea that this particular perception occurred toward the end of his mission. Further, one gets the idea that this disbelief or resistance to Jesus reached a point or intensity that became crucial. Jesus' enemies were about to make an all-out move to take his life. It seems to have become crucial in God's eyes too. We read that Jesus' enemies planned. So did Allah. He planned in such way so as to make their plans against Jesus serve his, Allah's purpose. Verse 54 reads, when Allah said, O Jesus, I will cause thee to die and exalt thee in my presence and clear thee of those who disbelieve and make those who follow thee above those who disbelieve to the day of resurrection. Then to me is your return, so I shall decide between you concerning that wherein you differ. Verse 55 reads, then as to those who disbelieve, I shall chastise them with severe chastisement in this world and the hereafter, and they will have no helpers. The believers are promised a great reward by Allah in the next verse. Then in verse 59 we read, this is the truth from thy Lord, so be not of the disputers. We are then told by Allah in verse 61 that what we have just read of Jesus is the true account. Here are other translations of verse 54. The translator's name is given first, then his translation. Yusuf Ali, behold, Allah said, O Jesus, I will take thee and raise thee to myself and clear thee of the falsehood of those who blaspheme. I will make those who follow thee superior to those who reject faith to the day of resurrection. Abdul Majid, recall what time Allah said, O Isa, verily I shall make thee die, and am lifting thee to myself and am purifying thee from those who disbelieve. Sherwan Ali, when Allah said, O Jesus, I will cause thee to die a natural death and will exalt thee to myself, and will clear thee from the charges of those who disbelieve. Nazir Ahmad, when Allah said, O Jesus, I will cause you to die and exalt you in my presence and clear you of those who disbelieve. To Jeffrey Parender, recall when God said, O Jesus, I am going to bring thy term to an end and raise thee to myself and purify thee from those who have disbelieved. J. M. Rodwell, remember when God said, O Jesus, verily I will cause thee to die, and will take thee up to myself, and will deliver thee from those who believe not. A J. Arbery, when God said, Jesus, I will take thee to me, and will purify thee of those who believe not. A. Maududi, it was to carry out his secret plan that he said, O Jesus, now I will recall you and raise you up to myself and cleanse you of the uncongenial company and the filthy environment of those who have rejected you. It should be clear to you that these various translators understand Allah's words differently. Now let us look at their notes, where these writers gave them. In note 436 of his translation, Muhammad Ali makes clear that he understands Allah to be saying that the Jewish plans to cause Jesus' death on the cross would be frustrated, and that he would afterwards die a natural death, ... This is his basic comment on the Arabic words, which he translates, I will cause thee to die. In his notes on the words, and exalt thee in my presence, he writes that the Arabic word which he translates to mean exalt signifies raising or elevating, and also exalting or making honorable. His note, 437th, contains his reasoning for not using the first or even both meanings of the Arabic word, which he takes as meaning exalting, making honorable in degree and praise. On one hand, he thinks that to understand the Arabic word to mean raising or elevating is not correct in this context, for raising a man in his body to himself, to Allah, implies that the divine being is limited to a place. On the other hand, he claims that even other commentators who are predisposed having no doubt been misled by Christian tradition to accept Jesus Christ as having been raised alive to heaven, have been compelled to admit that the Arabic word in that verse is not used for raising in the physical sense, but for exalting and honoring. Mr. Ali really does not show that those commentators he had in mind made the admissions he claims. No doubt many did. For all I know, all of them did. However, it is a fact that there are some who see this same Arabic word to refer to the sense in which he used it, the spiritual, as well as the physical, as you will see below. Mr. Ali takes the words he translates, "Clear thee of those who disbelieve," to mean that Allah will dear Jesus of false charges made by his enemies. He also says that this was done in the Holy Quran. This is the substance of note 438. His note 439 requires examination, for he is mistaken in vital areas. That will be done later. We will bypass the few notes that Y. Ali makes on his verse and go to those of a Majid. In his notes, numbers 468 through 471, he differs sharply with M. Ali and others. He sees the words, "O Jesus" or "Isa," to have been words addressed to Jesus or Isa as coming to him from Allah to console him on the eve of his arrest and trial, when he was naturally a little perturbed. He sees the words he translates, "I shall make thee die," to refer to a natural death at thy appointed hour, so these persecutors are powerless to do thee any harm. He writes that the original sense of the Arabic words under discussion is to perform a promise, to fulfill a covenant, and to give full measure. So, says Mr. Majid, the meaning may also be, "I will fulfill thy span of life," or "I will achieve the whole of thy term." It is clear that Mr. Majid thinks that Allah not only set a time for Jesus' life, but also informed Jesus of this. His translation also implies that this was told to Jesus to encourage him in his hour of great trial, that though it looked like death would overtake him at the hands of his enemies, Allah would see him through it. He would live beyond this most severe time, to die at a time after then. Based on things that Mr. M. Ali has written elsewhere, there is positive evidence that he would agree with Mr. Majid, at least on the point that Isa did live through his ordeal, beyond the death plot of his enemies. The big difference comes when Mr. Majid understands the Arabic word which Mr. M. Ali sees as meaning exalting and honoring as also having a physical reference. He translates the words to mean, "and am lifting thee" in the bodily sense. His notes numbering 470 and 471 make it clear that he sees Allah as having said to Jesus that you, Jesus, will die at the appointed hour. But that time is not now. Meantime, I will lift you bodily to myself, to where I am, to the place of my glory. Elsewhere, as we will see, Mr. Majid has in mind the skies, or the heavens. Again, it is the idea of a physical raising or lifting where he and Mr. M. Ali differ 100%. There are Muslim scholars and laymen on both sides of this issue. Mr. Majid also understands Allah to be saying a bit further on in this verse that he will clear Jesus of false charges and accusations. All of the Muslim scholars agree on this. Jeffrey Perrinder translates the Arabic understudy here with the words "bring thy term to an end" as quoted above. He writes that the Arabic also means "take thee to me." He says these words are taken to mean "cause to die," in the sense in which Pickthall translates the same words into English, "O Jesus, I am gathering thee," which, as Muhammad Ali says in his note 436, is the biblical idiom for causing to die. He is a Christian and thinks that these words came to Jesus from Allah just before his death on the cross. Of course, this is denied by the Muslims, who hold that Allah knows best what really happened and that Jesus did not die on the cross. Perrinder quotes Baidawi, who gave 5 alternative meanings. They are: 1. Achieve the whole of thy term and tarry until thy appointed end, or 2. Take thee from the earth, or 3. Take thee to myself sleeping, or 4. Destroy in thee the lusts which hinder ascent to the world of spirits, or 5. Involves God's letting him die for 7 hours, then raised him to heaven. This last point was a compromise with Christian thinking. Perrinder quotes some other modem writer who carefully constructs the Arabic words as meaning, "Truly I am he who calls you to death," or "it is I who am causing you to die," implying that Allah has the power over Jesus' life, not his enemies, and that Allah further is saying, "and I will receive you, Jesus, beyond death unto myself." Nazir Ahmad's translation is quoted above. He definitely sees Allah as having saved Jesus from the death plot of his enemies, and is of those who think Jesus escaped and eventually went to Kashmir. He quotes Al-Wasi as interpreting part of this verse as meaning, "It will complete the lease of your life, and will cause you to die, and will not let those people dominate over you who try to kill you." Mr. Ahmad is as convinced that Jesus was spared death via the cross, as he is that there was no physical ascension of Jesus, in any way, at any time, up to Allah. He does understand the exaltation of Jesus as coming after Allah makes him to die a natural death. He thinks that is the time when Jesus will be exalted in the presence of Allah. Later, this idea of Jesus being exalted in the presence of God after death will be dealt with, as Mr. Nazir makes clear that he understands the Arabic words to signify such ideas as shelter, protection, and the coming under Allah's holy care. Just how that can really be done for a dead man is not explained. Now we go to the notes of Maududi, whose translation was noted earlier. He writes that the word in the Arabic text is from a word which literally means to take and receive and to seize the soul. He states that this is not its lexical but its metaphorical meaning. He goes on to say that in the context of the verse we are looking at, the meaning is to recall from mission. He continues, Allah recalled Jesus because the Israelites had rejected him in spite of the clear signs he had brought. After reviewing the history of the evil of these people towards the prophets, and of God's last chance to them in the person of Jesus, he concludes, thus they had proved themselves to be so obdurate that it was useless to give the Israelites any further chance. So Allah recalled his prophet Jesus and inflicted on them a life of disgrace up to the day of resurrection. Now this scholar differs from such scholars as M. Ali and others in that he thinks there is something of truth in the Christian doctrine of the ascension. He writes, if the Christian belief in ascension had been wholly baseless, it could have been refuted by pointing out that the object of their worship expired long ago and had become one with dust, etc. In other words, Allah would have made it plain. But, he continues, the Quran does not declare this explicitly. On the other hand, it not only uses such words as give a vague suggestion of his ascension, but also denies that Jesus was crucified at all. That denial is in the 4th chapter of the Quran, which we will come to later. Meanwhile, Mr. Maududi states that whoever it was, or may have been, who died on the cross, and whoever it may be that Christians claim to be, the one in their pictures of a man on the cross, it is not Jesus. He says Allah took him before the crucifixion took place. He concludes that note, it is thus clear that those people who try to prove the death of Jesus from these verses really try to show that God is not able to express himself clearly and unambiguously. He doesn't get an argument from most Muslim scholars about Allah's power. However, those who do not believe that Jesus ever was taken up in any physical sense would give him strong arguments there. You can see this from others whom I've quoted. Mr. Maududi writes in another note that Allah had arranged to recall Jesus to himself, and that he did treat Jesus exceptionally. However, he strongly urges against drawing from this that Jesus is in any sense God's equal or is in any way God in the way that Christians teach. Now, let us move on to verse 157, in which Allah denies that Isa ever died on the cross at all, along with verses 158 and 159. Muhammad Ali translates it 157, and for their saying, we have killed the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, the messenger of Allah, and they killed him not, nor did they cause his death on the cross, but he was made to appear to them as such. And certainly those who differ therein are in doubt about it. They have no knowledge about it, but only follow a conjecture, and they killed him not for certain. 158. Nay, Allah exalted him to his presence. And Allah is ever mighty, wise. 159. And there is none of the people of the book but will believe in this before his death, and on the day of resurrection he will be a witness against them. M. Ali says that the Arabic words do not necessarily mean that Jesus was not nailed on the cross, but they do clearly mean that he did not die on it. The very interesting point he makes, on which other Muslim scholars agree, is that the Gospels contain clear testimony showing that Jesus Christ escaped death on the cross. It goes without saying that most Christian scholars and laymen would strongly disagree. But the fact is that he gave 14 powerful points, citing places right from the New Testament, to back up his contention that the Gospels do not teach that Jesus really died when the Christians think he did, nor did he die on the cross. Earlier, I mentioned that the Quran verifies the Bible's truths. Since the Holy Quran does state plainly that Jesus did not die on the cross, nor did his enemies even kill him, one should expect to find in the Bible that which is being verified in the Holy Quran. Surprising though this may be, the footnote in which the above-mentioned 14 points are mentioned is 645th. For your convenience, here is most of IFC. That Jesus died a natural death is plainly stated in 5:11:7, and I was a witness of them so long as I was among them. But when thou didst cause me to die, thou wert the watcher over them. See 752. The Gospels contain clear testimony showing that Jesus Christ escaped death on the cross. The following points may be noted. 1. Jesus remained on the cross for a few hours only, Mark 15:25, John 19:14. But death by crucifixion was always tardy. 2. The two men crucified with Jesus were still alive when taken down from the cross. The presumption is that Jesus too was alive. 3. The breaking of legs was resorted to in the case of the two criminals, but dispensed with in the case of Jesus. John 19, 3233. 4. The side of Jesus being pierced, blood rushed out, and this was a certain sign of life. 5. Even Pilate did not believe that Jesus actually died in so short a time. Mark 15:44. 6. Jesus was not buried like the two criminals, but was given into the charge of a wealthy disciple of his, who lavished care on him and put him in a spacious tomb hewn in the side of a rock. Mark 15:46. 7. When the tomb was seen on the third day, the stone was found to have been removed from its mouth. Mark 16:4, which would not have been the case if there had been a supernatural rising. 8. Mary, when she saw him, took him for the gardener. John 2015, which shows that Jesus had disguised himself as a gardener. 9. Such disguise would not have been needed if Jesus had risen from the dead. 10. It was in the same body of flesh that the disciples saw Jesus, and the wounds were still there deep enough for a man to thrust his hand in. John 20:25-28. 11. He still felt hunger and ate as his disciples ate. Luke 24:39-43. 12. Jesus Christ undertook a journey to Galilee with two of his disciples walking side by side with him. Matthew 2:8-10. Which shows that he was fleeing for refuge. A journey to Galilee was not necessary to rise to heaven. 13. In all post crucifixion appearances, Jesus is found hiding himself as if he feared being discovered. 14. Jesus Christ prayed the whole night before his arrest to be saved from the accursed death on the cross, and he also asked his disciples to pray for him. The prayers of a righteous man in distress and affliction are always accepted. He seems to have even received a promise from God to be saved, and it was to this promise that he referred when he cried out on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Hebrews 5:7 makes the matter still more clear, for there it is plainly stated that the prayer of Jesus was accepted when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him who was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared. The statements made in the Quran corroborate the above statements quoted from the Gospels. Jesus did not die on the cross, nor was he killed as were the two thieves, but to the Jews he appeared as if he were dead. Ali's understanding of the Arabic text leaves no room for the idea that someone was made to resemble Jesus. See note 646. In note 663, Ali writes that some of the early Christian sects did not believe that Jesus died on the cross. Some thought that someone else died in his place. Others had nutty beliefs. However, the significant Gospel of St. Barnabas supports the idea that someone else was substituted in his place. Ali continues, the Quranic teaching is that Christ was not crucified nor killed by the Jews, notwithstanding certain apparent circumstances which produced that illusion in the minds of some of his enemies, that disputations, doubts, and conjectures on such matters are vain, and that he was taken up to God. In his next note, Ali comments on Allah having raised up Isa by saying that there are differences of opinion about the exact meaning of this verse. The Jews did not kill Jesus, and he was raised up to Allah. He says that some hold that Isa never died in the usual sense and is yet alive somewhere in space. Others hold to the view that he did die, but not when the Jews made their final try. They think he was increased in honor, etc., after their attempt on his life, which he escaped. Whether or not one thinks Jesus is alive and will return to help kill the Antichrist, as Muhammad says in the Hadith, affects how the next verse is understood. Notice the words in verse 159, his death. Some think the his refers to Jesus, who they think is yet alive and will return and not die until some time after the death of the Antichrist. Others think the his refers to people who will come to believe before they die. Thus the his would refer to each person. Ali puts it this way in note 665, before his death. Interpreters are not agreed as to the exact meaning. Those who hold that Jesus did not die but was raised up to God in heaven refer the pronoun his to Jesus. They say that Jesus is still living in the body and that he will appear just before the final day in preparation for the coming of Imam Mahdi. When the world will be purified of sin and unbelief, there will be a final death before the final resurrection, but all will have believed before that final death. Others think that his is better referred to none of the people of the book, and that the emphatic form must believe denotes more a question of duty than fact. This is interesting. There are those, however, as mentioned above, who think that Isa won't die until some time after the final resurrection. Meanwhile, Majid has some very interesting points in his notes on these verses, some of which are mentioned here. In note 42 he writes, "It was not Jesus who was executed, but another, who was miraculously substituted. How and in what way is another question. and is not touched upon by the Quran for him. This true doctrine regarding Jesus is shared by an early Christian sect. He then mentions 2 reports on how this was done. The ones he mentions would probably be met by mixed reactions by most people in these days. Most church-going Christians might be offended. Others, in this Mission Impossible type world, might find tricky switches not only acceptable, but highly possible. In this verse of the Quran which denies that Isa was killed on the cross, Majid comments that it is the Jews and the various Christian sects that are disputing among themselves respecting Jesus and his fate. There is no doubt about this. Where the Quran states that they are in doubt, he says that they, Jews and Christians, are groping in the dark, have not true historical knowledge, divided, disputing, and groping about Jesus, despite their claim that their world is based on what they call their Judeo-Christian heritage, which they claim is rooted in God and Jesus. Majid translates part of verse 157 to read, "They have no knowledge thereof, they but follow an opinion." Then he comments that they are reduced to most slender and precarious speculations, that there exists a mass of legends, full of discrepancies, regarding Jesus, and very little of historical, authentic material about him, is also the verdict of the best modern biblical scholars. He then quotes from the Encyclopedia Biblical, a product of the highest Western scholarship, to confirm his position. In verse 158, Majid sees Isa as having been raised bodily to Allah, to his place of glory, the higher region. He continues, "The Islamic conception of Jesus as the Messiah," writes a Christian observer, "agreed with that recorded in the 80th Psalms and in Daniel's vision, where the Son of Man is described as raised from earth to heaven, not as come down from heaven to earth." Majid further quotes this Christian observer as having viewed Islam as compatible with original Christianity, not with Paulinic Christianity. In that verse, Allah mentions himself as ever mighty, wise. Mr. Majid comments that these attributes of Allah enables him to enforce his will in any circumstance. Therefore, he defeated and completely frustrated the plans of the rebels. Mr. Majid states that those who will be forced to acknowledge Jesus as a true prophet of Allah will be Jews. At that time, he claims their faith will not be of any avail. Sher Ali translates verse 157, in part, to read, "But he was made to appear to them like one crucified." He translates the other Arabic words, that Jesus will be a witness against his enemies, in just about the same English words as the others. Rodwell translates this verse in part to read, "But they had only his likeness." In his footnote, he writes that the Arabic literally means one was made to appear to them like Jesus. He then cites a few whom some of the early Christians thought died in his place. Arbery translates the Arabic to read, "Only a likeness of that was shown to them." Several words down he translates, "There is not one of the people of the book, but will assuredly believe in him before his death, and on the resurrection day he will be a witness against them." G. Parender cites this passage, verses 155 to 159, as critical to the whole subject of Isa's ultimate fate. He emphasizes the importance of the context in which this passage occurs. He reviews exactly how the writer Allah of the Quran comes up to the parts, which he, Parender, deems critical. He relates a few of the stories that people have believed about who was really killed and how it happened. His position is that the Gospels do teach that Jesus died on the cross. He acknowledges that some of the early Christians were reluctant to believe that Jesus could die. From them, many stories developed. He sums up ideas horn both Christians and Muslims about a substitute dying in Jesus' place. Mr. Parender states that although the idea of a substitute has slender foundations, it has been taught down through the ages and is repeated even today. Mr. Parender cites Dr. Kamel Hussein as representing an advance in thinking among Muslims in this area of thought. He quotes Dr. Hussein as saying, "The idea of a substitute for Christ is a very crude way of explaining the Quranic text. They had to explain a lot to the masses. No cultured Muslim believes in this nowadays. The text is taken to mean that the Jews thought they killed Christ, but God raised him unto him, in a way we can leave unexplained among the several mysteries which we have to take for granted on faith alone." Mr. Parender then writes, "In feet, it must be made quite plain that the Quran itself does not say that Jesus suffered in a false body, nor does it say that a substitute was made so that somebody else suffered in his place. Any later addition to this is unjustifiable and a perversion of the text. All that the verse in question says is, the Arabic transliteration is given. Either he was counterfeited for them, or better, it appeared to them as such." Mr. Parender agrees with the Holy Quran that the enemies of Jesus may have thought they had power to kill Jesus, but only Allah could do that. He mentions the ideas of modem Muslim writers on the question of how Jesus escaped, but without any real depth. Then he returns to Dr. Hussein's book City of Wrong, translated by Kenneth Cragg. There is one thing which you do not know. It is that God raised the Lord Christ to himself. He was the light of God upon the earth. The people of Jerusalem would have nothing to do with him except to extinguish the light. Whereupon God has darkened the world around them. Al-Maududi points out, in commenting on verse 157 of chapter 4, a comparative study of the Quran and the Bible shows that, most probably it was Jesus himself who stood his trial in the court of Pilate, but they could not kill or crucify him, for Allah raised him to himself. This is what happened. Then he gives his opinion in his footnote. Towards the end of this long footnote he writes, as regards how it was made doubtful for them that they had crucified Jesus, we have no means of ascertaining this matter. Therefore, it is not right to base on mere guesswork and rumors in answer to the question how the Jews were made to believe that they had crucified him, whereas in fact, Jesus the son of Mary had escaped from them. After a detailed note about the many different views Christians have of the nature of Jesus' death on the cross, which shows they have no real knowledge of it, Mr. Maududi writes, in his note 195th, that Jesus' enemies did not succeed in killing him. Allah raised him to himself. But, he writes, it is silent about the nature and details of the matter, and does neither say explicitly whether Allah raised him bodily from the earth to some place in the heaven, nor does it say that he died like other mortals. It has been couched in such language that nothing can be said definitely about the incident except that it was uncommon and extraordinary. The following considerations lead to the conclusion that the incident was extraordinary. First, the Quran uses the words here the Arabic word is given. Allah raised him to himself and I will raise you up to myself for the incident, and these words are liable to give support to the doctrine of ascension, one of the Christian beliefs which misled them to attribute divine qualities to Christ. Had it not factually been an extraordinary incident, the Quran would never have used such ambiguous words as help support a doctrine of Godhead of Christ, which the Quran refutes so strongly. We will skip his second reason why he thinks the Quran or Allah regards this incident as something very special. His third reason reads, if the incident that has been related here meant merely the natural death of Christ, the use of words, and Allah is all-powerful and all-wise in connection with it, would have been quite meaningless. These words can appropriately be used only in connection with some extraordinary manifestations of the power and wisdom of Allah. He then makes a strong case for the idea that the words of the Holy Quran do give just cause for the conviction that some have, that in some way Isa was taken to a place of safety with Allah. At one point he writes, why does the Quran not use a direct word for death, instead of such a word as this, which is liable to support the doctrine of ascension, which in its turn has given rise to the doctrine of the divinity of Jesus? The use of this word is a clear proof of the fact that there was something extraordinary about the incident. Above all, the doctrine of ascension is further strengthened by the traditions according to which Prophet Christ, son of Mary, will come again to the earth and fight with Dajjal, Antichrist. These clearly and categorically prove the second coming of Christ to the earth. Therefore, it would be more rational to believe that he must be living somewhere in the universe before this second coming, than that he might be laying dead somewhere. Nazir Ahmad quotes the very learned and late Mahmud Shaltut, with whom the Honorable Elijah Muhammad met in 1959, on this great subject. The full text of his statement is too long for this short think piece. It is enough to say that his views are not the same as Mr. M. Maududi, in certain respects. In essence, he believes the Quran teaches that Jesus escaped death at the hands of his enemies at the cross. He lived by the power of Allah beyond that crisis, and later died a natural death, and is yet dead, and will never return. Mr. Imol's translation of 5:116 to 118 reads, and when Allah will say, 0 Jesus, son of Mary, didst thou say to men, take me and my mother for two gods besides Allah? He will say, glory be to thee. It was not for me to say what I had no right to say. If I had said it, thou wouldst indeed have known it. Thou knowest what is in my mind, and I know not what is in thy mind. Surely thou art the great knower of the unseen. I said to them, naught save as thou didst command me. Serve Allah, my Lord, and your Lord. And I was a witness of them so long as I was among them. But when thou didst cause me to die, thou wast the watcher over them, and thou art witness of all things. If thou chastise them, surely they are thy servants, and if thou protect them, surely thou art the mighty, the wise. This reminds me of chapter 17 of the book of John. It contains Jesus' prayer to God, so we were told, for his followers and those who would come to believe through them. It is written that this prayer was made by Jesus just before his arrest. Mr. M. Ali is of the view that this shows Isa to be dead at this time, not alive somewhere. He also points out that this proves that just as followers of Isa perverted his teachings, so did followers of Muhammad do the same. Some followers, Ali doesn't have much to say about these verses. though I am sure he saw them as pregnant with meaning. A Majid sees these words of Allah as that which he will say to Jesus on the day of resurrection. He has many notes on these verses. We can omit what few notes the others wrote. The main points they made on the subject of Isa's death are made in connection with the other verses dealt with earlier. There are many Muslims on both sides of certain aspects of this subject, even though they read the same Quran and traditions of Muhammad. This very fact raises questions, the answers to which have and would fill more books. In fact, the true answers are as controversial and even more explosive than what is in what you are reading now. For example, how could such confusion or division arise among people who take the same book to be filled only with God's words? Why should there be different interpretations? The Honorable Elijah Muhammad has raised and answered questions that cast a light so bright on everyone and thing that much of what is called solid knowledge by this world dwindles into guesses and ignorance. Why has God permitted his words to be misunderstood? Why has he permitted some to deceive others about his words, his intentions, etc.? What means will he use to produce clarity about his words? How will he eliminate once and for all the confusion concerning the fate of Jesus? We have a right to expect him to take decisive action, for this is promised by him in his own holy word. Well, I am among those convinced that he has taken decisive action as explained by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad for over 4 decades. That explanation includes the fact that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is the Muhammad to whom the Holy Quran is ultimately addressed, and not the Muhammad of Arabia, who lived and worked 1,400 years ago. If this is true, and it is, it must follow that he who gave the messenger the Holy Quran also gave him the right understanding of it. That understanding or interpretation must have included the fate of Jesus. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad has stated clearly that Muhammad of Arabia, 1,400 years ago, was not the man for whom the Quran was ultimately intended. He, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, says that he is the one whom Almighty God Allah had in mind as the real receiver of the ultimate meaning of the Quran. That is, he is the man Allah had in mind who would be bound to receive the full meaning God had in his mind when the Quran was written. Now, why has God permitted his words to be misunderstood? Why has he permitted some to deceive others about his words, his intentions, etc.? Earlier I wrote that the ultimate reason for such permission rests in the mind of Allah. Less profound factors making for confusion about God's words in general and about the fate of Jesus in particular are misunderstanding and deceit. In the light of this, let's work from the less profound factors to the ultimate one. The key idea to consider in understanding this matter is that of secrecy. First, let us go to the origin of it. It is the secret of God and the devil. God and the devil have been in on a secret regarding the identity of each other. God would not reveal the devil before a certain time. The devil wasn't going to tell the public the truth of God anyway, although at the time of his end, he would be forced to admit this truth. Even then, he would only admit the truth of God indirectly, at first. God would reveal himself as he is to the public at a certain time. He would expose the devil too. He would even force the devil to bear witness to the truth. Naturally, the devil would do so only against his will. So there was to come a time when the God and the devil would be known as they are. To the public, naturally, that time is the end of the devil's world. Such knowledge would force the public to make a choice between the two. Since the devil would be in power up to the time of God's arrival, the public would already be under his evil rule, without knowing the devil's identity. So the choice of the people is to give up Satan and go under the rule of God. Since God has come to kill the devil, all those who continue to follow Satan are doomed with him. Therefore, their choice is really to continue to live, but with God, or to die with the devil. Allah revealed his will and word to the prophets in such a way that the public could not on their own get the complete or clear or the full understanding of the reality of God and the devil. This was in keeping with his intent to keep the secret until a certain time Allah permitted the devil to do his evil will to the divine prophets. The wicked also misused the scriptures. The scriptures in this instance, the Bible, contained the words of both God and the devil. This, I emphasize, was the devil's work with God's permission. Without God's permission, the devil could not have even come into being. The Holy Quran, on the other hand, contains only the words of Allah. In some places in the Quran, the author Allah tells the reader that what is in it, his word, is not to be doubted as there is nothing doubtful in it. In some other places, it reads that its truths are plain. This may seem to be contradicted by the example of the controversial verses on Jesus' fate. The solution to this apparent contradiction lies in God's purpose. The presence of the devil, the condition of Satan's victims, the manner in which Allah would both destroy the devil and set up his government are among the major considerations of Allah in revealing his word as he did in the Quran, sometimes dear and in other places undear to most until certain times. Some facts were put in a way that is hard to understand, Nevertheless, it was done for a wise and beneficial purpose. Note that the author of the Holy Quran revealed it with truth. Muhammad Ali's comments contained in footnote 382nd on the Arabic word translated with truth reads, "For the sake of simplicity I render haqq," as meaning truth, but haqq primarily signifies suitableness to the requirements of wisdom, justice, right, truth, or fact, or to the exigencies of the case. The italics are his. At a certain time, Allah would reveal the meaning of the Bible and the Holy Quran to an individual. That man would make its meaning so dear that no one could justifiably misunderstand the truth. In the opening words of the Quran, disbelievers are referred to as those who will not believe despite what or how the messenger teaches them. They will have to be whipped by Allah. Therefore, their hearts become sealed, and their eyes and ears have a covering placed over them. Thus, they are prevented from understanding or coming to the truth. This is a law of nature stated by the Quran's author, the creator of our nature, and the laws that govern our beings. This sealing and covering, which is symbolic language, is the natural result of the rejection of truth. As Mr. Maududi puts it, if one takes a biased view of something and deliberately nourishes prejudices against it in his mind, then he can neither see any virtue in it, nor can hear anything in its favor, nor can he open his heart to consider it dispassionately. This is the law of nature. I mentioned the above because of its bearing on our subject. If many people will refuse to accept the simpler truths, it follows that they will not or may not accept that which is more difficult. And as you may agree, we are dealing with a hard subject. Just as there have been many down through the centuries who have unintentionally misunderstood God's word, there have been many who deliberately misrepresented what they understood of the truth. Add to this the fact that God was keeping some big facts either secret or obscure. No wonder then that the subject of Jesus' life, and especially his death, has been a subject of controversy. Remember, the devil has built a religion, in fact, this entire world, on lies and half-truths about Jesus. But God would not interfere because he could not fully expose the truth of Jesus without revealing the truth about himself and the devil before time. What is being said here is that despite the fact that the public thinks they have most of the main facts on Jesus, they really did not until Master Fard Muhammad came and spoke to his messenger, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Now the facts are known, the meaning of the facts are also known, and so that old saying was never more true: truth is stranger than fiction, especially where fiction has reigned supreme. If you have read the Holy Quran's teachings on Jesus, you know that no Jesus of the past did the work described in it. This is also true of the Bible. Jesus of 2,000 years ago did not raise the dead. There are just too many other things described in both Quran and Bible that the Jesus of 2,000 years ago in Palestine simply did not do. As said at the start of this writing, all that could or should be written cannot and will not appear here. But just consider this as a small example of the fact that most of what is written in scriptures cannot refer to a man Jesus of the past. The historical Isa Jesus died at about age 36. Yet the Quran says that Jesus Isa will speak to the people in old age. We could spend much time, you in reading, I in writing, bringing up points like this, small ones and big ones. That, I repeat, is beyond the scope of this writing. So I hope you will do that reading yourself. If you will take the time and read the Quran, and look at the arguments of Messenger Elijah Muhammad on the subject of the identity of the person addressed by its author, Allah, it will become clear that Muhammad of Arabia could not be the man for whom it was ultimately meant. Strategy on a scale the devil never dreamed of was involved in the way Allah revealed the Quran. The main thing to know is that the Quran was originally written with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in Allah's mind as the ultimate recipient. Isa Jesus and the white man named Muhammad of Arabia 1400 years ago misunderstood their relation to certain big parts of Allah's word until very late in their lives. Each man thought he was the one to usher in the judgment by the power of Allah. Each thought he was the last messenger with the final word from Allah. Each thought he was living in the last days. Each thought he was dealing with that chosen people of God through whom God's eternal rule would be set up. Each learned better just before he died. Meanwhile, their misunderstanding was part of a larger misunderstanding that Allah permitted. We are the recipients of the benefits of his purpose in allowing what he allowed. Christians claim that the New Testament records the works of those who were foretold in the Old Testament. Jesus is the central figure of the New Testament. In fact, the Old Testament is loaded with prophecies fulfilled only now at the end of the world, by and through those we were made to think were here 2,000 years ago. The evil motives of many were involved in the production of the New Testament. At the same time, there were many who respected the words of the prophets. They were convinced that they were living at the end of the world 2,000 years ago. So even though there are many false things in the New Testament, there are also great truths in that book. Much of the basis of the New Testament is prophecy. However, it is bent and twisted in such way that it gives the idea that much of what the prophets foretold about the coming of God was fulfilled 2,000 years ago. The way Christians explain things, the Old Testament foretold the coming of Jesus twice, both 2,000 years ago and again at the end of this world, which is ending in this century. Actually, there is more in the New Testament about a second coming of a Jesus than there is about the first coming. So, in effect, the New Testament is but a messed up picture of what would be fulfilled of the Old Testament prophecies. Those prophecies are being fulfilled before our eyes and in our very beings right now. The Quran straightens out or verifies that which is true in the Bible. Allah knew the devil would twist up his words, yet he permitted it, knowing full well that he would make it all clear one day in a manner that would provide the maximum benefit to everyone, even to white people. Since Jesus of 2,000 years ago is still dead and will forever be dead, he cannot be the one whose second coming is so much written and spoken of. You cannot find any place in the Old Testament where it is written that anybody will one day be put on a cross and killed there for the sins of the world. You can read that God's last messenger would get in a cross or get crossed by some Judas types. But you will not find that he was actually put on a physical cross. You read that a Jesus was murdered on a cross. So it seems. But even there in the New Testament, there is at least reasonable doubt, if not cause for outright rejection, of the idea that Jesus died on the cross. Even Paul and Peter thought he died on something else. So do others who wrote books back then. Paul and Peter thought he was hung on a tree, as we have been here in America for the last 400 plus years. The historical Isa was stabbed, according to what Master Fard Muhammad told the Honorable Elijah Muhammad over 40 years ago. He taught the messenger the knowledge of the historical Jesus. He also gave him a profound understanding of the Bible and Quran's teaching about Jesus. Gradually, the messenger was guided by Allah into understanding that the greater percentage of everything in the Bible about Jesus refers to himself. He has publicly spoken and written this. Needless to say, the reaction would have been wild if the American public had paid more attention to this powerful and explosive announcement. It was taught in temples around the country for years, but not many really saw what they were looking at. Smile. Misunderstanding and deceit are at the root of the confusion about Jesus' death. It is at the root of the mix-up over who is to return at the final destruction of the devil's power at the time of the setting up of Allah's government. However, this does not get to the root. That root is in the mind of Allah, who neither misunderstands nor deceives. The messenger has made plain the key that Allah gave him that unlocks the meaning of Jesus' life and death. Note well that this meaning rests in the mind of Allah. Isa did not see this until the end of his life. Of course, even then he could not see it as well as Allah, who brought about his life. He best knows Isa's significance. And we made the son of Mary and his mother a sign. 2350. Elsewhere, 1921, Allah says in the Quran that he made Isa a sign to men. Muhammad Ali's opinion, note 1550, the real reason why Allah made the real reason why Allah made Jesus a sign. In summary, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has taught for many years that Isa was a sign of two men and a people. One of the men is Master Fard Muhammad, the Supreme Being. The other is himself, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the messenger of the Supreme Being. The people are us, the black men and women of America. Yes, clearly truth is stranger than fiction, especially in a world based on fiction. The messenger once said, "There are many things prophesied of the future under many other names other than the real one. This is done to protect the real one." I could say much on this subject, but you would not believe it, although it is the truth, and the days of the manifestation of the truth. That was 18 years ago. Since then, he did drop much of that truth. Most of our people rejected it, or simply paid little or no attention. God, in the person of Master Fard Muhammad, is manifesting the truth that he taught his messenger in many ways. Ultimately, to use the words of the messenger, he will open the eyes of the world to that which has been hidden from them through his first convert, Messenger Muhammad. He will make everyone realize his truth by making all taste the consequences of their reaction to his messenger, whom he has filled with truth, whatever form that action takes. In the light of the truth, we can now see much about this or that one whom the author of the scriptures wrote, regardless to the names used. The names are descriptive. The people described are here. The events foreseen are taking place. You can verify this by making a careful comparison between what has been written in Bible and Holy Quran to that which is taking place right now. Beyond the shadow of a doubt, the messenger is right when he says, Jesus of 2,000 years ago cannot be alive in some place. Again, he is right when he says, there is no record of anyone, regardless of how good or bad they were, coming to life after being dead and buried, before Jesus, nor since Jesus. Let us ponder this thing. The messenger asks, Just what purpose would Jesus have served 2,000 years ago for God to have allowed him to suffer death and bring him back to life, and then hide him from the public's eyes until the end of the world? Caucasian Christians cannot give an answer to this that is in accord with Allah's creation. The messenger once said, "God never speaks nor does a work without a purpose." His purpose, as you saw in the messenger's words on page 103, pervades the universe. Scientists know that some uniform purpose rules every aspect of the universe through the laws that govern every atom that makes it up. They call it the rule of law. Again, asks the apostle of Allah, why should God love Jesus more than any other of his prophets while Jesus was unable to convert the Jews to whom he was sent to him? Moses' grave has not been found, nor has Moses been seen by the world since his death, nor any of the former prophets. Abraham was one of the beloved prophets, but we have not seen him risen from his death. It seems to me that if he were to break the law of nature and bring one back from a real physical death, he would do that for his last messenger rather than for Jesus. Can we expect this even for the last one? No. The originator of the universe created death. He made it part of the life in and of the universe. Allah's prophets are signs of the last one. They all reflect the life and work of the last messenger. However, there is special mention in the Holy Quran on the fact that Jesus was a sign. Let us understand the fact that the messenger teaches that Jesus Isa was a sign is the key to grasping that man's life and death. This is true both of the historical Jesus and of the biblical Jesus. Now, isn't it interesting? As the messenger once observed, neither the Holy Quran nor the Bible tells us what Jesus and his mother were signs of. This forces two vital questions. 1. Why did Allah hold this back? 2. How can we know the answer which he held back from the answer others give? In other words, how can we tell which is his answer once he reveals his answer? The messenger's answer to the first question is, that is done for protection and to serve as a test between the knowledge of believers and disbelievers in the last days of this world. Protection, a test. Let us consider protection first. Master Fard Muhammad is a man, so is his messenger. Men can be killed. The devils would have killed God if they could have. True, as the messenger once said, such attempt would be suicide for the devils. And if such were tried back in the 1930s, it would have brought about their destruction before his intended time. You must remember, we were still asleep. It took time to awaken us. Allah wanted this awakening to take place right along with other things he was bringing about simultaneously all over the earth among other people. Let us think deeply on the fact that Almighty God Allah, in the person of Master Fard Muhammad, is the one who best knows when and how this or that ought to be done. We may not always be intelligent and or good enough to act in harmony with his wisdom. However, that does not affect his knowledge of what we ought to do. Moreover, our knowledge and actions do not affect that which he has unconditionally decided to do. We all set times when we say we will do this or that. So has he. But the difference is that when he decides to do a thing unconditionally, it is as good as done. The above is stated to show that Master Fard Muhammad was and is supremely wise and self-controlled. He is able to speak and act in relation to others in such way so that which he wills is bound to happen. His will always takes place. Then, when it is necessary, he can make others think and do that which he wants them to, without the least injustice to them or anyone else who is affected by those who act as the direct consequences of his action or will. So Allah has so fixed things that those things which he wills that must take place will occur, regardless to what others think, feel, or do. Again, this is mentioned in connection with Allah's purpose to protect those that need it in order for them to carry out his will. He would not let things get out of hand back there in the 1930s. He had a messenger to produce. Through that messenger, essentially, and by other means, generally, he had determined to produce a people who would one day rule eternally from his wisdom. He had to protect himself. His messenger had to be protected. We had to be protected. Therefore, our collective identities were concealed in such way in the Bible and the Holy Quran that none of us could be known until the set time of Allah, except for a few. Let us explain how the few could know before the vast majority of the others. Consider the combination time locks on the vaults of banks. In the banks are the valuables of the people. The bankers want to protect those valuables, or they should smile. So they put locks on the vaults. We must know the right combination to open the vault. We must also know when to work the combination. If we don't work the combination at the right time, we cannot open the vault. Now, we may know the combination. So what? That does not mean that we can get to the goodies before time. So it was with the few. These few knew who was to be who. They also knew just about when these whos would appear. They knew all of this and what was to come because they were wise to divine prophecy. Now, a few of these few were devils, And because of how the prophecy was written in the books, they, the wicked, could not take advantage of what they knew to stop the arrival of the God or his messenger. One of the factors in the writing of prophecy involves putting it down in such a way that it cannot be understood until just about the time of its fulfillment. Even then we can understand it only according to our level of decency, regardless to how smart intellectually we may be. In other words, a chief factor in grasping the inner meaning of Allah's words has to do with the extent to which we are in harmony with Allah's will. Read the 12th chapter of Daniel. There is a hint of this big fact there, and elsewhere too. So the wicked were distracted at the time of Allah's arrival. Before they knew it, he was among us, creating his messenger. Years later, they told the messenger that if he was teaching us Islam just 20 years earlier, they would have shot him on sight. The messenger had to be protected from his ignorance of his own self before he came to know himself by the power of Allah. I'm not getting into the protection of the messenger after he was blessed by Allah to know who he messenger was. Common sense tells us, however, that somebody had to be watching over and protecting him. If not, he could not have gotten through America teaching what he taught those 40+ years. So we can see that it was for wise purposes that Allah did not tell in the Quran of whom Jesus was a sign. As hypocritical as America is, as evil as whites are in their evil use of Jesus, we know it was wise of Allah not to make plain that Jesus was a sign of the Jesus coming to judge them. It was wise that it not be too clear until time that Jesus was also a sign of the Jesus who would rise from the grave of ignorance and filth, which were the original black people in America. It was also a wise move on the part of Allah not to identify the messenger as the Jesus that the dead Jesus served as a sign of, who would teach us and the world all of the truth, including the very origin of truth, good, falsehood, and evil. On April 5, 1997, one made a talk titled Jesus, 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 Jesus in Greensboro, NC. In it, I included some of how what is written in the Bible about Jesus is related to or is fulfilled in Minister Farrakhan's person. In other talks, I've also cited what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has taught, that another of the meanings of the rise of Jesus from the dead is the rise of justice among the spiritually dead black people of America. 898. Imagine the people calling on Jesus in church and the messenger standing up and saying, "Here I am." Remember earlier I wrote that the messenger's observation, neither the Holy Quran nor the Bible tells us what Jesus and his mother were a sign of, forces two questions. The first is, why did Allah hold this back? We saw that protection was a reason. This act also served as a means of setting up a test between believers and disbelievers in these last days. Let us see how and why this holding back of the knowledge of who Jesus and his mother served as signs of serves as a test. After I have commented on this, we will then move to the second question. Mentioned earlier, what is a test? What makes a test a test? What is done with a test once it is either failed or passed? What effect will passing or failing this test have on us? Just in what way does this particular test, which involves Jesus, serve Allah's purpose? When you test something or someone, you use some means to evaluate. Underlying the means or methods used are some kind of rules or principles. You are trying to determine qualities. Any good dictionary will give the following ideas about the word test: examination or trial, any critical examination or decisive trial, means of trial, subjection to conditions that show the real character of a person or thing in particular. Absence is a test of love. Such and such is a test for color blindness, the tuberculin test for tuberculosis, that with which anything is compared for proof of genuineness. Any series of questions or exercises or other means of measuring the skill, knowledge, intelligence, capacities, or aptitudes of an individual or group to have one's inner self or strengths, abilities, etc., shown or determined by means of a test, the means by which the presence, quality, or genuineness of anything is determined. The means, methods, or forms for assessing, evaluating the performance and capabilities of, a way of eliciting responses for use in measuring the traits, capacity, or achievements of, the process of detecting the presence of an ingredient in a substance, or of determining the nature of a substance, or a person or group. A test is something stronger, more specific than a trial. It is a trial under approved and fixed conditions, or a final and decisive trial as a conclusion of past experiments. In a test you determine something. A test settles a controversy. A test is a decisive trial. A test is a way of establishing something or reaching a convincing conclusion. Like the word trial, the word test carries something of the idea of the separation of the good from the bad in a person or thing. Therefore, these words stress not so much the conclusion reached, but the process by which the guilt or innocence of a person is definitely proved, or a thing's genuineness or falsity, its worth or worthlessness, or its degree of strength or validity is definitely established. So from the above, that comes from dictionaries, we can see that test is the putting to decisive proof, through whatever means or methods are fitting, or the subjecting of a thing or person for the sake of such proof or a determination of the facts. I hope this has worked your brain, as this is the purpose of this writing. Of course, illustrations from history, everyday facts of life, etc. would make even clearer what test means. We now take a look at the question of just in what way does this particular test involving Jesus serve Allah's purpose. The God gave his messenger a copy of the Quran. Like all other copies, it did not tell of whom Jesus and his mother were signs. Neither the original nor any translations give us that answer. The answer came from the mouth of Master Fard Muhammad. The quickest way I can possibly sum up what the messenger said is to say that Jesus is mostly a sign of two men and a people, as mentioned earlier. A few of America's blacks believe this to be the truth. Most don't. Now the messenger is absent. Whether he is dead or not, he is not on the scene. Fewer believe what he taught about Jesus than before. Who then is right? Again, what is it about Allah's holding back the truth of whom Isa was a sign that makes for a decisive test between the knowledge of the disbelievers and the believers? There must be something about and in this held back or unknown answer that once known has the effect of producing the most profound type of test. There is, anytime people don't know the truth of something, and then that truth becomes known by them, right, then that truth becomes a test of what is in them relative to that truth. This is a general law of nature. That truth, whatever it may be, will force some kind of response in each of the listeners. There is no way for anyone not knowing a hidden truth to avoid the force of the power of truth. Once they come to learn of it, they are compelled to react in some way that tells what is in them with respect to that aspect of truth that they are getting at that time. The reason for this is due to the fact that knowledge is a power that forces changes. The greater the knowledge, the greater the change it produces. Now Allah created the universe from himself. High's truth. He and his universe, or the laws that govern the whole, that is the effect of his being, work against every kind of falsehood. That name, the Lord of the worlds, if understood by us, makes clear why everything is forced to manifest whatever is in it when he comes and makes his presence known and reveals the full range of truth. This is a day of judgment, which we've heard about all of our lives. Everything of man is laid bare today. The meaning of the rainbow illustrates this beautifully. Nearly nothing is unknown today, although understanding comes gradually, another law of nature. Now, there were no believers or disbelievers in the final truth to be given to this world before Meister Fard Muhammad left the messenger to teach it. When he began teaching it, then the people began forming themselves into groups respecting that truth. Read the Quran, chapter 98, and elsewhere, such as 4:1-45, 4:2-14, 64:4, 56:7. Broadly speaking, the messenger and what he teaches, does, and establishes by divine guidance forms the final tests. By these tests, people are separated. What is in us is forced out, even when we try to hide what is in ourselves. We cannot hide as the truth has more power to force out than we have to keep back, except as Allah pleases. Smile. Those who don't like truth become its enemies. There are varying degrees in all of this, depending on the person and the particular truth presented. I am just speaking, or rather writing, in general terms. Our total reaction to the whole of the divine truth taught by the messenger determines our worth. It forces distinctions among the people. The kind of distinctions that divine truth brings about is not like the lightweight distinctions we usually make. This divine distinction is the work of Master Fard Muhammad. He did and does this for his own purpose. He wants the believers. He wants those who through his messenger and the message come to think, feel, and act like he, the Supreme Being, does. These are the ones he chooses. Out of such people the kingdom of God or heaven is built. Naturally, some parts of Allah's truth are more important than other parts. Though if one really accepts one part, they are duty-bound to accept the rest. If they don't, they will lose belief in the part they first claimed to accept. Then they will eventually lose belief and trust in Master Fard Muhammad and his apostle. One of the most important parts of his truth is the truth of himself, his messenger, and ourselves. The truth about the subject of Jesus is also the truth about ourselves. To accept the truth about this vast subject of Jesus is to accept the truth about Master Fard Muhammad, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and you and me. Please, don't be offended by the repeating of this point. What the messenger taught about Jesus, up until 1975, competed with other ideas that we were taught by others about the same subject. Now, recall the feat that this subject cannot be separated from the subject of God. We are going to tend toward becoming whom or whatever our God is. Therefore, those who accept what the messenger taught about God become different from those accepting any other God. The exact same thing is true with respect to the subject of Jesus due to the fact that it totally involves God. Thus, the area of the messenger's teachings about Jesus is one of the most important areas of his message, if not the most important. This does not mean that what he taught, for instance, about Moses is not equal in importance if the point made is about the God, the messenger, and ourselves. We must remember that the scriptural teachings on Moses are mostly about the messenger. We've all been personally and publicly involved in the test of knowledge with disbelievers. These disbelievers believe things about the truth of this or that differently from those who believe the truth. This is natural. On occasion, such discussions tests specifically concern Jesus. What we learn from the messenger has been tested by Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, agnostics, and atheists, also the very ignorant. In turn, what we had learned tested their knowledge. Many of us were so engaged over the years. Many millions have been and are now involved in a much bigger test. The truth of Jesus is but one of them, though one of the most important, as it concerns the God, the messenger, ourselves, and our enemies too. Now the messenger is absent at this time. Another idea of what Allah did not reveal in the Quran, of the meaning of the sign of Jesus and his mother, is now being given by the messenger's son. He claims that what he is giving is an increase, not a contradiction, of his father's teachings. Now we must say that we know that Allah knew when the Quran was written what the real truth was that he kept back from the pages of the Quran. He knew the future. He knows which of the various views of the subject of Jesus is the same as what is in his own mind when he wrote the Holy Quran. He knows that this subject involves, among other things, his own nature and character. So since this is the day of judgment, we can expect that sooner or later he will manifest even clearer than he has. Which of the views of this subject is his truth? He will eliminate all other views. Meanwhile, which view is right? Do we have a view that is contrary to his view on this vital subject? He held back this truth of Jesus so that when it was revealed because of its nature and profound effect, it would serve as one of the great tests, which would distinguish those whom he wants from those he does not want, or does not want as much. This truth is at the base of the great separation he is to bring about in the last day. I hope that my remarks have helped you get a better idea of the purpose of Allah in holding back the knowledge of those of whom Jesus serves as a sign, protection, and a test. Now, I'd like to move to the second question mentioned earlier. How can we know the answer which he held back from the answer others give? How do we know anything, whether true or false? How do we tell our one from the other? That question is a lot bigger than many might think. Get a good dictionary and look up the word epistemology. Whether you think so or not, you should know what is involved in that term in order to win over the enemies of truth in argument. You say no? Well, Allah thought otherwise. He really went into the nature of knowledge with his messenger. If we still take the messenger's teachings as he presented it, we are bound to accept what he taught about Jesus as true. We are also bound to view all other views of Jesus in terms of what the messenger taught. Since, as the messenger taught, Jesus was mostly a sign of two men and a people, there has got to be a tie-in or connection between the fate of Jesus and the fate of those of whom he served as a sign. Of whom does the fate of Jesus, as written in the Quranic verses we discussed earlier in this writing, refer? Is the book pointing to the departure of Master Fard Muhammad? Is it directing our attention to a great crisis in the life of Messenger Elijah Muhammad, or to some great event in the life of the American black man and woman as a whole? If the words are directing, or focusing our attention to a specific time in the life of Messenger Elijah Muhammad, what do those words tell us? Is there any relation between those words, in the Quran, or even that which it verifies, which are in the Bible, and in the events leading up to and ending around February 25, 1975? Why did his son, Imam Wallace-Din Muhammad, say that the subject of his father's death would take an entire lecture to deal with? He said that it was a big subject in the scriptures. Then that is saying that it was and is a big subject in the mind of Allah. Why hasn't he taken it up yet? Consider this from the book of which this writing or letter was part of its appendix. Where is Jesus right now? Is he somewhere off the earth, in the sky? Did he come back horn death? Was he really seen going up into the sky by a few of his followers? Numerous are the conflicts over whether or not Jesus died, and how he died, if he died, whether or not it was on the cross, and what happened to his body. However, these conflicts seldom take place among us, the black people of America. In fact, few of us have really given hard thought to these questions. Most of us just assume that Jesus died on the cross in the way that the preacher said he did. Most of us still have the mental picture of a white man hanging on a cross, sometimes between two criminals. Few of us know that a growing number of Bible scholars and students in the seminaries around the country know that the truth of Jesus' death in the Easter story is far different from what is taught in church. Black people have been taught that Jesus died on the cross. We were told that he died on a day called Good Friday. They said he died for the sins of the world, ours too. Is all of this true? The last week and day of Jesus' life takes more space in the Bible, the part called Gospels, than all of his life up to that point. There is little mentioned of his actual birth. Next to nothing is written of the first 30 years of his life. There is brief notice given of an incident when he was 12. Nothing else. Little is mentioned of the first year of his ministry. More is given of his second year. Still more is given of the third year plus. Then 8 of the 28 chapters of Matthew, 6 of the 16 chapters of Mark, nearly 6 of the 24 chapters that make up Luke, nearly 10 of the 21 chapters that make up the book of John, cover from his last week through what is said to be his rise from the dead and his ascension. But even most of this space is taken up by the events of his last week. Please note that 7 of the 10 chapters of John which deal with Jesus' last week focuses on the last 24 hours of Jesus' life on earth, which constitute 33% of the Gospel of John. Why? This makes one think there is some significance in this arrangement. What happened the last week and hours of his life? Black people have been taught that Jesus came into Jerusalem riding on a colt or an ass, that he was hailed as the King of God's coming kingdom, the Son of David, coming in the name of the Lord. His speeches, violently driving the traitors from the temple, arguments with his opponents, Judas's secret agreement to betray Jesus, the Last Supper, his prayers to the Father, the betrayal, the arrest, brought before the high priest and other officials, before Pilate, before Herod, before the mob that cries for his life. Some spit on him, beat him, he is mocked, a crown of thorns was put on his head, nails are driven through his hands and feet, his agony, the intense darkness, his death on the cross. But they also say he survived death and rose up to meet God in heaven. Did all of this really happen back then, 2,000 years ago? Why are so many Christian scholars so puzzled, down through the centuries, over such parts of the Bible as Hebrews 5:7-9? You should read this passage. They cannot reconcile the fact that God heard Jesus' prayer with their teachings about his death. If you ever have read what they write on this, or think deeply enough, you may find yourself wondering about the truth of Jesus' death, as Christians teach it. Muslim scholars cite this passage from Hebrews as part of the evidence that Jesus did not die at the time in his life that Christians claim he did. Reread Muhammad Ali's 14 points mentioned earlier. Upon close examination, as you can see, if you took the few minutes to read these 14 points, the New Testament revolves around whether or not Jesus really died when they said he did. Or you may agree with Mr. Ali that he did not die at that time at all. Read, think, draw your conclusions as to whether or not you think whoever is written about died there on the cross or not. Be objective. Try to determine whether or not the words there in the Bible really teach of a death or of a narrow escape. Now consider this. If the Bible's Jesus is really a future person's, just what are we being told? I know that many Muslim scholars think what is taught of Jesus refers to the history of Muhammad 1,400 years ago. I have read their comparisons. They miss the mark by a wide margin. They often try to bend or twist prophecy to fit various parts of Muhammad's history. This is not to say that certain prophecies were not partly fulfilled in his history. In these instances, he serves as signs of events fulfilled in the life of Master Fard Muhammad, his messenger, and more. 3 years after Muhammad's wife died, he narrowly escaped from a death plot. He got out of Mecca and fled to Medina. Just before these two events, he experienced what is called the night journey and the ascension. You can get some idea of what this is about by reading the introduction to chapter 17 of the Quran, 17:1. Note 1400, and 10th, 1411, and 1439th through 1442nd Muhammad Ali's translation. This night journey and ascension to God is that which is in the book of Daniel about the man under the title Son of Man. See chapter 7 verses 13 and 14. He was taken in the night to God. Now, who is that Son of Man? Different people have different ideas. Christians think it refers to Jesus. Not so. We must first know of whom this prophecy refers before we can know where in his life it fits or takes place. There is great similarity in the language and the picture of this Son of Man of Daniel 7:13-14 and the Lamb in the 5th chapter of Revelation. To my knowledge, all of the Christian and Muslim scholars agree that whoever the Son of Man is of Daniel, he is the same person mentioned in Revelation under the title of the Lamb. Read Revelation. Is Jesus of 2,000 years ago, or Muhammad of 1,400 years ago? Or the Honorable Elijah Muhammad of today, the Son of Man written of in the book of Daniel 7:13? Could either Jesus of 2,000 years ago or Muhammad of 1,400 years ago be the Lamb of the 5th chapter of the book of Revelation? If these men are dead, it is hard to see how this part of scriptures could in any way fit either of them. So, who do these prophecies fit? Who did God have in mind when these passages were written? Do these passages fit, or are they fulfilled in the person of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad? There are at least 7 places in the Quran where the man to whom it is addressed is told something of his death. There are many other places that discuss this subject in a more indirect way. Let's look at those 7 places. Holy Quran 21:34-35. The messenger is told by Allah that no one was ever granted permanent life. That is, everyone must one day die. So he is told that if he dies before he actually sees the victory, that will not mean that his enemies will live without eventually being punished and destroyed. Abdul Majid comments that his death, whenever it comes, is not disproof of his apostleship. This cuts down those who were jubilant at the prospects of his death. This was revealed at a time when it seemed that he, Muhammad of 1,400 years ago, would die. Holy Quran 13:40. The man to whom the Quran is given is told that whether or not he would live to see part or all of the punishment of Allah on the wicked, his duty was to go on with the work he was given. His job was to make the message reach them. Allah would call them to account. He would bring on the judgment according to their reaction to the message. This was also a stem warning to the wicked as well as a consoling message to the messenger. Holy Quran 39:3031. He is told by the God that one day he will die, but so will they. The next verse hints that this death will not be physical. Holy Quran 23:93-95. The messenger is told by Allah to say to him, Allah, that if he, Allah, shows him the messenger, that against which the disbelievers are warned, then he is to also ask that Allah not cause him to be among the wicked, nor to be in their company, so that when they are whipped he gets it too. In effect, this is a prayer that Allah made the messenger do if he should live to the time when the wicked are punished. Note that Allah says in verse 95 that he is well able to do according to that prayer. What is this a hint of? Holy Quran 3:143-144. The believers are asked whether or not they will become disbelievers if the messenger is killed or dies otherwise. They are reminded that messengers have died before him. They are also told that if they become disbelievers, that won't harm Allah's cause. Then they are told that no one dies without Allah's permission. This tells us that whenever he dies, Allah will have permitted it. It will be by his permissive will, and he never wills or allows anything without his own good purposes. Holy Quran 43:41-44. The recipient of the Quran is again told that whether or not he lives to witness the punishment of the disbelievers, it will come to them. It is certain and beyond doubt due to Allah's complete power and mastery over them. He is told to hold fast. Then he is told that this Quran was, among other things, a reminder and a source of eminence for him and his people. Then he is told that he will be questioned and or examined. The other readers are also told that they will one day have to give an account to what extent they have profited spiritually by this divine message. In other words, to what extent have we come to have in us the very spirit which is in Allah and his apostle? Now, it seems obvious that this questioning, or examination of the recipient of the Holy Quran, must occur after he has completed the term of his mission. By the way, this did not occur with Muhammad of 1,400 years ago in such way so as to meet the terms of this prophecy. Holy Quran 10:46. The man to whom this wonderful book is addressed is told that whether or not he is shown part, or all, of the just punishment of the rejectors of him and his message, it will happen. This, however, is a surface reading of this verse. Of course, it is beyond the scope of this writing to go as deeply as we could in any of the above. Muhammad Ali, note 1130th, writes, "Those who are warned will be dealt with as they deserve, and the warning will prove true." In the first part of the verse, they are told that it is no concern of theirs whether the prophet lives to punish them with his own hands or that punishment is executed by Allah in some other way. The verse, therefore, only lays stress on their approaching doom. Muhammad Ali saw more deeply than his translation shows in English. He mentions the possibility of part of the punishment coming through the man to whom this book was given. If the man here is Messenger Elijah Muhammad, then he is not dead, and is also the man spoken of in Revelation, who will return to take a big part of the execution of certain parts of the judgment of the wicked. See, for instance, Revelation 19, and think of the Jesus Isa, who Muhammad said in the Hadith will come at the end of the world to kill the Antichrist. Rodwell translates parts of this verse in this way: "Whether we cause thee to see some of our menaces against them fulfilled, or whether we first take thee to ourselves, to us, do they return?" In his note, he writes that in the Quran, the ordinary Arabic word for to die seems to be avoided in speaking of Jesus and Muhammad. Why would Allah not use the ordinary word for death? Why would he hint at survival if he did not intend on conveying that idea? If the Jesus of the Quran seems to escape death, or if he did escape at a time when it seemed that he did die, and if the Jesus is a future man, and if that man is the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, then he yet lives, and he will return in his own person. If the Muhammad of the Quran is also the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in these verses about his death, it seems like a strong possibility, if not a high probability, that he yet lives, and you can expect him. Sher Ali translates part of this verse in these words, "Or, if we cause thee to die before that, then to us is their return, and thou wilt see the fulfillment in the next world." He can only see anything if he is alive. Note Sher Ali's translation of the Arabic into the English "cause to die," mentioned above. Remember, or rather take time to reread and reflect on the arguments of the different scholars quoted in the first part of this writing. I hope I have fulfilled to your satisfaction what I set out to do as covered in the first 2 paragraphs of this writing. There are many other things that could or should be written to round out or fill out the truth of this matter. I am not going any further. Let me know what you think and see, and if you think to any degree differently than before you read this. And remember, you have no choice but to decide with whom and under whose rule and word you will live. I hope this deepens wherever you are coming from. Started December 25, 1975, ended January 21, 1976, an afterthought. Today is January 26, 1976. I have just glanced at the previous pages. This is the first time I have done this since several days prior to the 21st. As a result, I have decided to add a few words on certain areas. My purpose is the same as that stated in the opening words of this writing, to help you. There is a great resemblance or similarity between the histories of various prophets, messengers, saints, and certain great men, often taken to be prophets of Allah, and the history of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. It is easier to show this resemblance between some of those men and Messenger Muhammad than between him and some others. For example, it is easier to show the similarity between Moses and Messenger Muhammad than between Jesus and the Messenger. Of course, it can and has been done. One of the main reasons is the emotional factor. Most black people are much more emotionally attached to Jesus than to Moses. Moreover, Jesus is identified with God to a much greater degree in the minds of most blacks than is Moses. In any case, it is vital for our people to know why there is a similarity in the first place between those men and the messenger. I won't go into that, except to note that all of those men point to the messenger. If this can be proven, it shows a wise preconceived purpose, design, or plan. It does. In feet, it is all, in my view, part of the purpose, design, or plan of Allah to bring about a 100% better world of people. If you take the few minutes it takes to compare the fates of the prophets, messengers, etc., recorded in the scriptures to that which was expected of the last messenger, you will find a similarity between theirs and the messengers that is remarkable. Notice the circumstances that led up to their deaths, in some cases, or escapes, in other instances. Is this coincidence, or is this prophecy? Not many people know that there was death plot talk during January and February 1975. That was also the case in Isa's history. Not only that, just as the Jesus of the Bible expected death plot, so did the messenger. The Jesus of the Bible expected a tyrant-like fellow to mislead his followers after he went to the Father. So did the messenger. In fact, both predicted that most all of their followers would leave them. There are certain parts of the Bible that describe a situation so much like what happened just before and just after February 25, 1975, that will force you to wonder if you are not reading a word picture taken and written thousands of years ago, yet aimed or taken of last year. If you didn't respect prophecy before such readings, I think you will after taking the little time required to check this out. I will stop here, hoping that you will give all that I have written your deepest thought and fullest attention. I am sure the true and living God will aid you to know just what is what and who is who, to a far fuller extent than you ever dreamed, if you will it. For it is His will that we all come to understand the truth which is in Him. I also hope this helps you see yourself in relation to the personalities and events of these significant times better than ever. January 26, 1976, 6 Minister Farrakhan's magnificent answer, "For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ shall all be made alive." 1 Corinthians 15:22. The interview of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, from which I excerpted a small part and placed it in an earlier part of this book, was done over a period of several days. On April 3, 1994, in a follow-up question, I asked him this: "Do you think you would have come to the position in which you are without your having come to the realization that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is yet physically alive?" Without hesitation, he responded, "Never, never, never could I have reached the point that I'm reaching, or have reached, and am still reaching right now, had I not come into that realization. In education, there is a thing that is called a plateau of learning. When one reaches a plateau of learning and stops there, the process of learning stops and the process of intellectual death begins. So when I saw my leader as dead, the fountain of my spiritual and intellectual growth had died. There were so many unanswered questions in what he had taught me that I then had reached a plateau of learning, and having stopped there, a process of intellectual death had begun. This was because certain things I had been taught, and of which I was convinced, which were the foundation of my life, and which were linked inextricably to his life, were now being broken down. As I was convinced that he was dead, and at a certain point, even though I wanted to rebuild his work, out of my love for him and love for the people, there is no way I could have carried myself or the people forward without coming to that realization. Once I realized that he was in fact alive, the whole of the Bible, from Acts to Revelation, took on new and vital meaning, which meant there was no longer a plateau in my growth. I began to grow again, and not only grow again, but grow into a new growth, because the realization of his life and his growth, the realization of his the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's growth and his higher life, after I thought he was dead, is also the realization of my growth and my life. The realization of his the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's renewal, after what appeared to be his death, is the realization of my own renewal after my appearance of death. It is the realization that all of humanity can be renewed, but only renewed in him, in a proper knowledge of him, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And this is why I believe the scripture says, all become new creatures in Christ. This excerpt from the above-mentioned interview of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was conducted on a Easter Sunday morning. Minister Farrakhan continued, "It is so fortunate that this comes on a day that is called Easter, a day of renewal, a day of restoration, a day of reconciliation of man with God through this renewed faith that he lives. For me to see this apostle, this disciple," author's note, here he is referring to himself, to be so honored to be proclaiming, "On this day, I know that my Redeemer liveth." This is powerful. Because of my growth, you see. And because of that knowledge first, and that faith, which is the precipitant of the growth, I now can grow the clergy into that which they have hoped and prayed for. So this is how and why I notice that when I speak to men of religion, they break down and they cry. As the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan spoke, he thought back to a specific experience of his with a certain pastor in Ghana who himself broke down and cried in front of others over the powerful witness from the text of the scriptures which he heard coming from the mouth of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. That pastor's name is Reverend Schuler. In no way was Minister Farrakhan putting that pastor down as he spoke to me. However, a few years later I heard this same pastor express what seemed to me to be a need in him to misrepresent Minister Farrakhan with falsehoods. I twice heard him do this on radio programs when promoting one of his books throughout America and maybe beyond her borders. Minister Farrakhan noted the effect of his witness to the Christ on this pastor, then moved on to say, as he heard the words of scripture that he's all too familiar with, but he now shifted his mental attention to the clergy as a group have such new and revivifying meaning coming from one who has died in and now lives in the man Jesus that the book is talking about, and who is its central figure. I can see, going back to the letter that I wrote to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, am I the first to believe in you as this Christ figure? Well, I am not the first, in the sense of belief, but I am the first in the sense of experiencing a certain growth into life by seeing, in the light of my renewed faith, that he is truly alive in his body and is with his Lord. And after coming out of my death, and then to be the first to experience that maturation into the love and appreciation of self and of my connection to God and his Christ, I am being used as a vessel to get others to experience the same thing. The 16th chapter of the book of Matthew contains the famous passage called Peter's Confession. From the current Catholic translation of the Bible we read in Matthew 16:13-16, when Jesus went into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter said in reply, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." This event did not take place 2,000 years ago. But even if it did, it was prophetic, a type or sign of an event that did take place in the 1970s in the United States of America. It took place between the man of whom Peter was a sign, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and his teacher, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. As Peter's work in its essence, from his teacher according to the Bible, was to make his teacher's great commission known, so did the Honorable Elijah Muhammad give this assignment to his minister, the Honorable Louis Farrakhan. In my humble view, Minister Farrakhan has magnificently carried out this and all phases of his assignment, from the time he arose, in September 1977, right through today. And I fully expect that he will continue to do all that is written of him. I think all right-minded people, everywhere, ought to pray for Minister Farrakhan to be blessed to hear these words from his teacher, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, as it is recorded in Matthew, chapter 25. In Jesus' parable of the talents, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant, thou hast been faithful, enter thou into the joy of thy Lord." My explanation: do not despise prophetic utterances. Nevi'iths, 5:20. Do not treat prophecies with contempt. Naboths, 5:20. One summer day in 1990, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan telephoned me about an interview he recently gave Emerge magazine. He informed me that they were not satisfied with the photos they had taken of him. He informed them about the quality of my photography, and they agreed to take a look at some of my pictures of him. He gave me the name of the person at Emerge to whom I was to send some photos. Then he told me that he had mentioned me and the book by which he arose in 1977, To Rebuild the Nation of Islam. I was surprised, and I asked him what did he say. He just laughed and made a few comments that made both of us laugh. He was well aware of how I feel about any publicity, which is directed to myself. The Almighty did not make all of us by nature, disposition, and function to be equally at ease in the public. There are only a relatively few of us whom God actually created with the capacity to be excellent in the public. This is for His glorious purposes. I'm not one of them, nor are the majority of us. Moreover, I did not intend for that book to ever become a public matter. His interview with Emerge appeared in its August 1990 edition. The questions were very good. His answers, as usual, were excellent. The minister's answers included an outline of the indications, both indirectly and directly, made by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, that he would depart from among us at a certain point, and that the nation of Islam would fall, but rise, never to fall again. He then made clear his incredulous state of mind at that time, when his teacher, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, told him of the nation's future fall, which was closer than Minister Farrakhan could see at that time. As he explained, this flew in the face of the tremendous success the nation was having throughout America, which was symbolized by such events as the dinner held in honor of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, at which even the President of the United States sent a representative. A wide array of civic, fraternal, and governmental organizations were honoring his teacher. There were huge numbers coming out to hear him, the minister in New York City, -70, 0, and 40,000, for example, at 2 meetings in 1974. All over America, other ministers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad were having great success. Consider this example. The largest selling black newspaper, at that time excluding Muhammad Speaks, was the New York Amsterdam newspaper. They were selling 50,000 per week. The sales of Muhammad Speaks had reached 1 million newspapers per week. Minister Farrakhan's answers involved the departure of his teacher, the entrance of new leadership, the changes that were made, which destroyed what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad labored for over 4 decades to build. The profoundly agonizing internal wrestling he underwent here is an excerpt from that interview. Emerge, that must have been a rough time for you when you first broke away. You were Tom in a way. You tried to work with Warith, right? Farrakhan, that's correct. Emerge, what was going on in your mind then? Farrakhan, I loved Imam Warith Muhammad from a young boy. Out of love for him, I did my best to try to keep the nation together and stay with the Imam. But I did not like, at a certain point, the way he handled his father. And when I could not feel comfortable anymore under his leadership, I backed away, but not with the thought of raising a counter-movement. I was just going to quietly fade into the night and maybe go back into show business and do something to feed my family. Minister Farrakhan then stated that he met me in September 1977 in Los Angeles, and he gave me a book to read that he had written. When I read that book, I was so inspired that I decided at that moment to rebuild the work of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Now, although the minister covered a lot of ground in this interview, he did not go into every point as deeply as he could have and has on other occasions. Among the details he did not touch was one that I covered earlier to a limited extent, and which I've covered more extensively in talks and in other writings over the years. It was the fact that either in the latter part of 1976 or early in 1977, the idea began to rise in his heart to lift the name and rebuild on the foundation left by his teacher before we met in September 1977. I strongly suggest that you who want to go deeper into this area of his experience at that time ought to search through all of the speeches Minister Farrakhan has made, time-consuming as that will be. Start with the early 1980s. When I walked into the restaurant in a hotel in Hollywood, California, and saw my brother, Minister Farrakhan, I immediately thought back to the time when I recall first meeting or seeing him. It was in a restaurant that the local temple, as it was called in New York City, leased. Anyway, I think we were leasing the property. But it felt like we owned it. I was working there when I first saw that beautiful countenance and smile of Minister Farrakhan. He is the type of brother who is very easy to love. Now 22 years had passed. I smiled too, as I was happy to see him. The last time I saw him in person was December 1974. One wanted to talk to him but could not, like I wanted to. For one thing, others were always present. My time was limited. Allah would not allow it. I next spoke to him the next year, in February 1975. That was a closer call. But such a meeting was yet to come. Now was the time. And in a restaurant. On the other coast too. In Hollywood, as far west as far as I was conceived as we could meet, we left his table and went to the counter where we waited for the waiter to give him his change after he paid his bill. There I had a chance to gain a brief sum-up of his thinking on key subjects. He spoke on vital points. As I listened, I thought to myself, he is such a beautiful brother, who is just below a thin sheet of ice. This is going to easier than I thought. We then went up to his room to put the brown shopping bag up on a shelf in the closet of his room. Then we went for a long 3-hour walk. During that time, he brought me up to date on the last 30 months. It was like watching a fantastic movie. We went back to his room where after some good conversation I left, and he began the process reading most of what was in the brown bag. Now, at the right time, and in fulfillment of his own holy word, given through the prophets, and in response to a specific prayer of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad for Minister Farrakhan. And at the precise time, Allah himself brought about that which was needed to trigger in Minister Farrakhan that which was already in him for his own perfect purposes, for his own glory. I am using the word trigger as defined in dictionaries as anything, such as an act or event, that initiates or precipitates a reaction or a series of actions and reactions. The next question put to Minister Farrakhan by the interviewer of Emerge was a very natural and routine question, given the context and flow of the interview. It was, what was the name of the book? Minister Farrakhan responded, I don't think Brother Jabril had even named it at that time. It's a book that has not been printed. It chronicles the life of Jesus and compares it to the life of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the rise and fall of the nation to the rise and fall of the early church when Jesus went to the cross. The interview went on successfully and covered many other important areas. The public was well served in that effort by both Minister Farrakhan and Emerge, so somebody wrote a book and couldn't figure out what to call it. Besides, it was never published. So what difference does it make? Ordinarily, I might say that. But because of what I've been blessed to see into the mission of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, I think my answer is relevant to the purpose of this book. So what follows is my answer to Emerge's question in the light of what I've been blessed to see of Minister Farrakhan's identity and his overall mission. It is not the book I wrote that I wish to focus on, as it was not the realities to which it pointed and described. A book is a reality in itself. It is a thing that exists unless or until it is destroyed in some manner. But some books, as we know, describe with varying degrees of accuracy very important people and events. Let's look at the people. Let's look at the events. What Minister Farrakhan did not cover in his answer to the question of the book's title was that which he was not necessarily thinking about at that time. However, it forms an essential part of my answer. It's about himself as best I can see from the viewpoint of God. Minister Farrakhan's answer to Emerge contained two parts. The first part was, one don't think Brother Jabril had even named it at that time. It's a book that has not been printed. I've already stated that an event or a combination of events in 1974 settled my mind on just what I was to do with the book I had written. I was not to publish it. I was to give it to Minister Farrakhan. I did. I knew what I knew at that time when I wrote what I did. Of course, there were many things I would learn more clearly, and other things I would learn for the first time. Only then, be it Allah's will, might I be able to write that book about Jesus. I've not yet written it. But I pray Allah He blesses me to do so. Ordinarily, people give titles to the books while they are writing them, even when they are not finished. If they have not settled on a final title, they give it a temporary one called a working title. I had written more than one temporary title on the cover page. Among the titles I tentatively gave it were Jesus, Then and Now, the Jesus Book, and It Is Finished. None of them really satisfied me, even though all of them fit to a certain extent. So at best, these were working titles. With respect to this book, which Emerge and Minister Farrakhan briefly discussed, the term working title fit, because in a special sense it was incomplete. As mentioned above, Minister Farrakhan's answer to the question of the book's title simply could not cover that which he was just not thinking of at that time. Nor did he know the struggle I was experiencing with the book's title over a period of several years. Yet his answer forms an essential part of the answer he has given, in his person and work, here in America and elsewhere, since he arose to rebuild the Nation of Islam. In 1977, that answer is what I came to see and have been bearing witness to, first to a few before he arose and witnessed to as many as I could, and then to many others, from increased understanding, after September 1977. To explain what I am driving at, let us look carefully at the rest of Minister Farrakhan's answer to emerge, which was, it chronicles the life of Jesus and compares it to the life of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the rise and fall of the nation to the rise and fall of the early church when Jesus went to the cross. Although the book I wrote went beyond the cross, both in the lives of Jesus and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, let us look at the word chronicles and how Minister Farrakhan used it. A chronicle is a chronological record of events, a history. Chronological means that which is arranged by occurrence in time, a chronological list of events. This is what one Webster's dictionary says of these two words. Part of a definition given in the American Heritage Dictionary defines chronicle as an extended account in prose or verse of historical events. After Jesus went to the cross and then, after some stopping off points, he went up to God. We've been told that he is with God today and is soon to return. This is what white folks taught us. We've also been told that after Jesus' resurrection and ascension, Peter and then Paul arose and built the early church. The answer Minister Farrakhan gave indirectly points to the extraordinary position that he holds with God, his Christ, and with the rest of humanity. Of course, he has discussed this in other interviews, but always to some limited extent, because such involves himself and he does not really take up himself as a subject any more than his teacher did. Part of my testimony has been, and is, that both Peter and Paul were among the signs or types of the Honorable Minister, Louis Farrakhan. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave wise hints and outright statements to Minister Farrakhan about his identity. Among these was Peter's relation to the minister. He did it in more than one way. One was by having the minister do a series of talks entitled, "On This Man Have I Laid the Key." The minister didn't catch the profundity of his teacher's request, but his teacher knew that one day he would. His teacher knew him and all of the stages through which he was destined to pass through until they meet again, as it was written. In a certain sense, Peter was the one who led the other disciples in expressing to Jesus their recognition of Jesus' identity. In the 16th chapter of the book of Matthew, we read what is called Peter's confession. This refers to Peter's expression of Jesus' identity, especially in relation to God. Jesus used certain circumstances to make known certain truths. He chose a particular time in which to lay on Peter the fact that on him would he build his church. Moreover, he did it in front of others. We've also read that Jesus told Peter he would fail, but not altogether. Jesus further made clear that the rise of Peter for his future work was set in motion even before his fall. Jesus said to Peter that when he came back to him, Peter, was to strengthen his brothers' sisters too. Luke 22:30,132. No one can deny that Minister Farrakhan has indeed been the rock on which the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is building his house. The gates, or the powers of this world would not, have not, and cannot prevail, or succeed, against what is being divinely built, despite all of their combined efforts to destroy the rock. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan? How many black men, or any man do you know of, who have been able to withstand the kind of pressure that this world's best have put on Minister Farrakhan? The Honorable Elijah Muhammad one day told Minister Farrakhan that he didn't like Peter too much for him to be like Paul. Minister Farrakhan didn't know it at that time, but during those 3 days, in September 1977, significant and powerful prophecies were being fulfilled in him. Without a sincere study of this, we will not really come to understand Minister Farrakhan on the level or to the degree that we could, which is for our own benefit, nor can we grasp what was going on in the spirit of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan at that time, nor now as he travels inwardly and externally onto his teacher, without that study which activates and maintains God's Spirit, out of which operates day and night. The proper study of people and things takes us into the spirit of what we are studying. Only then we are in position to really understand the person, that is, if the study is of the proper kind. He did not know at that time that he was fulfilling the sign left by Peter, in the rise of Peter and his work in the building the early church. Nor did he know that he was likewise fulfilling the same prophecies respecting Paul. And this is not all. We must remember the concept of types essentially means prophecy. We ought to keep this in mind as Minister Farrakhan was and is fulfilling prophecy daily. In 1975, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad went up to meet his teacher. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan went down as part of his preparation to eventually go up to meet his He was down for 30 months. I gave him a book to read, which 3 years earlier I came to see I had written for him. He would read that book for 3 days. On the third day, he arose. On the third day, in September 1977, one visited Minister Farrakhan. He looked refreshed, pained, and determined. We exchanged the greetings of peace, the same one Jesus taught his followers according to the Bible. Then he said, "Brother, your eye operation was a success. The scales have been removed from my eyes." In that instance, I saw that my brother was the fulfillment of the sign of Paul. Paul was a type of my brother, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. I kept that to myself for a while. You may or may not agree that Acts 9:18 has any bearings on that moment on the 12th floor of a hotel in Hollywood, but it does contain these words, "And immediately there fell from his eyes as it had been scales." These words were typical of the words of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. "Brother, your eye operation was a success. The scales have been removed from my eyes. All praises are due to Allah, for only He could have guided my efforts and have produced all of the circumstances that were necessary." In and around Minister Farrakhan, leading up to that day that resulted in what occurred within him, out of which came those words. He asked me to join him in prayer. Then he immediately went to work, to continue the next phase of what he was bombed to do. So the book he read did not really have a settled title at that time. But this seemingly very minor point becomes very relevant to all that has and is going on today, once we realize that the book dearly corresponded to a certain point in the history of the Nation of Islam. It went up to a certain point in the life and work of both the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Minister Farrakhan. In the case of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, it went to his second meeting with Master Fard Muhammad and touched his return, one day, in the power and the glory of God himself. Now, in one sense, the first phase of the mission of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was completed in 1975. In another sense, it was not. Moses went up to the mountain to get the next lesson from God. He came down and found his people in calf worship. He broke the tablets and later he had to go and meet with God for the third time to get a copy of those lessons. As I twice explained in 1984, in the book Farrakhan, the traveler the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was not to come down in the physical sense to give Minister Farrakhan the next lesson. He must go up to his teacher. He did the next year, in his September 17, 1985 More Than a Vision experience, which points to that glorious meeting he was promised by his teacher. So in another sense, the first phase of the mission of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was and yet was not completed in 1975. That is great mercy from Allah to us. He is finishing this first part of his mission through Minister Farrakhan, while working in the next or second phase of his mission. I hope this explains why the book I gave to Minister Farrakhan did not have a finished title, nor was it actually finished in every respect, because it was in the process of being finished in the life and in the work of the man to whom I gave it, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. I am among those who have been bearing witness to this finishing process over the years. That witness is ongoing, so we are repeating and finishing up very significant periods of the histories of the past, which all points to us in these days of the ending of this world and the creation of the next. Moreover, we are also repeating and finishing up recent history, from 1930 onwards, some of which is painful, all of which is the outworking of the will of Allah, in fulfillment of prophecy, which was history written in advance. I wrote a series of articles for the Final Call, touching on the subject of pain, among other issues. Here is some of one of the articles I wrote in April 1993 that bears on what we've been looking at. At this point in this book, it is written in the Bible in the 20th chapter of John that Jesus asked one of his followers, Thomas, to touch him in the place where he was speared, to determine for himself that he was alive. Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." This is related to a passage the Honorable Elijah Muhammad often referred to. It's in verses 54 through 56 of the 5th surah of the Holy Quran. He made us to see that it was first directed to us prior to 1975, and yet it pointed to a time after 1975, after the time of the departure of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and on the rise of Minister Farrakhan in 1977. He said that after the Nation of Islam fell, it would arise, never to fall again. Why did he say never? What did he foreknow? What did he know of the root of this never? What is the root of never, and how does never relate to forever, or that which is eternal? This is related to this saying of the Jesus in John 14:12, wherein he said, "I tell you the truth, anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. He will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father." Italics mine. Was he saying that he was less than his followers who would do greater things than he? No. Look in John 13:16, where Jesus said, I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. The fact that Paul reached far more people than Jesus did not mean that he was greater than his teacher. He worked in the name of his teacher and did greater works than his teacher. Why did working in the name of his teacher, Jesus, enable him to succeed on a greater scale than his teacher in terms of reaching and affecting the masses? His teacher went to the Father, God. What did his going to the Father have to do with the greater success that Peter and then Paul had with the same people? What is there in this term because and the reality to which it pointed that explains the success of Paul? Did his teacher gain added power from God, and did he use it on those below? How did he do that from where he was to where Paul was? According to the writers of the Bible, a far greater measure of the Spirit of God was sent down through and by Jesus upon his followers. His Spirit was released and sent in greater measure than they had before he departed from among them after Jesus went to the Father. How come? Jesus was given a far greater measure of his Father's Spirit after he worked and suffered among the people for a set time. He was given the wisdom and guidance of the next world in full measure. That which eye had NBT seen, ear had not heard, nor had it ever entered the mind of anyone to ever conceive of that divine wisdom. Jesus worked the divine will and power that he was given by his Father, through Paul and others from his exalted place, out of the public's eye, at the right hand of the Father, high above the nations of the earth. When Jesus was physically with his followers and said what he did as quoted above in John 14:12, he was speaking from his knowledge of the future. Again he stated, I tell you the truth, anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. He will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. This explains why Jesus said, with such certainty, that he will do greater works than these, because I am going not to the grave in death, but alive to the Father. All of this was written of us today, as if it already happened about 2,000 years ago. Whether or not it fully took place 2,000 years ago, it yet provided for us a picture of people and the events of our times and what we are all experiencing and living through. Although the Honorable Elijah Muhammad one day urged the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan to be like Paul, not like Peter, he knew that his servant had to go through a stage like that which Peter went through before he would be ready for the enormous task that he would undertake, as he has since 1977. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan was destined to go through the Peter, Paul, and then the Jesus stage. He is still becoming what Allah wills for him. He is well on his way to the next and the final stage of his journey. In brief, the ultimate goal of this journey that we are all invited to make is oneness with Allah himself and his Christ. Minister Farrakhan is a fuller man because of his teachers, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's fullness. As just mentioned, he has not yet become what he is becoming. So it is with each of us. Now, Paul commanded his followers to follow him. He also said, follow Christ. And he also said, follow God. Was he mixed up? Paul was saying that to follow him was to follow Christ, which was also to follow God. Regardless to what one may think of Paul, who at best was but one of the signs of the fuller man, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, his person and work provides a good picture of a major aspect of what we are passing through right now in the fulfillment of this major aspect of the divine mission, in the person and work of Minister Farrakhan. Again, in I Corinthians 14:1, he wrote, follow the way of love and eagerly desire spiritual gifts. But before we can even get to fill out this picture and give the evidence that justifies it, in our lives as we mature, there are those whose heart condition is such that they condemn it even before it is finished. Sis, the Holy Quran says of them. In the Holy Quran, we read in Surah 10:36-39, part of which teaches us that the rejectors, who follow conjecture, reject Allah's revelations, which their state of mind won't permit them to grasp, even as they judge his wisdom, which is in the process in accomplishing that for which he revealed it. Such judgmental persons are casting unjust stones at the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and at we who follow him, even as others like them did to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his followers in the past. They don't realize that they are like those before themselves who condemned the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, even as they now claim to believe in him. They don't realize that in their expressions of contempt for the ambassador of Christ, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, they are showing their contempt for the wisdom of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who chose Minister Farrakhan, under divine guidance, to teach and do as he is. Jesus confronted his false accusers with that for which they had no sane or just answer. In John 10:30-38 we read, the Father and I are one. The Jews again picked up rocks to stone him. Jesus answered them, I have shown you many good works from my Father. For which of these are you trying to stone me? The Jews answered him, we are not stoning you for a good work but for blasphemy. You, a man, are making yourself God." Jesus answered them, "Is it not written in your law," he said, "you are gods?" If it calls them gods to whom the word of God came, and scripture cannot be set aside, can you say that the one whom the Father has consecrated and sent into the world blasphemes because I said, "I am the Son of God"? If I do not perform my Father's works, do not believe me. But if I perform them, even if you do not believe me, believe the works, so that you may realize and understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father. This is to be understood on more than one level, time and place. The scriptures read that their salvation was tied up in their belief in him whom God had raised and made the means of their coming to him God himself. This teaches us of the value of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Now today, to reject Minister Farrakhan is to reject his teacher. To reject his teacher is to reject God himself. According to I Peter 1:10-19 concerning this salvation, the prophets, who spoke of the grace that was to come to you, searched intently and with the greatest care, trying to find out the time and circumstances to which the Spirit of Christ in them was pointing when they predicted the sufferings of Christ and the glories that would follow. It was revealed to them that they were not serving themselves but you, when they spoke of the things that have now been told you by those who have preached the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven. Even angels long to look into these things. Therefore, prepare your minds for action. Be self-controlled. Set your hope fully on the grace to be given you when Jesus Christ is revealed. Do we search or study these times as the prophets did? Who wrote what they did for us? We are in the times they were blessed to see only in the Spirit. How much more blessed are we to live in such times, in reality? Notice that verse 20 states, "He was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake." This little statement is a book in itself. And in Jude 18 we read, "They said to you, in the last times there will be scoffers who will follow their own ungodly desires." These are the last times, when there would be persons who, although quite capable of grasping such supreme wisdom, bound up in such passages as given above, would reject it due to false pride, envy, and extreme arrogance. This is a shame. These who claim to be with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad who speak evil publicly of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, who has done more than anyone anywhere to lift and clear the name of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, reveal themselves as not really being with him. To condemn a man who is lifting the man you claim to follow is show that you are not with the man you claim to follow. Again, how has the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan handled all of this? His sentiments are expressed in such passages as the following. That can be read in Peter 2:21. "To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example, that you should follow in his steps." The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan follows in the footsteps of his teacher, suffering the same and for the same reasons, which emanate from our wickedness and from the wickedness of this world. However, it is all for the majestic and glorious purpose of Allah. Look at the picture. How could Paul form Christ in others if Christ was not formed in him by Christ? How could it be done without pain? It is written that Paul stated that forming Christ in the people was to him like that which women experience when giving birth, new life. So, pain was inevitable. But pain was not the purpose of God for his people. It was a part of the process of straightening out what was crooked in them, a part of the healing process through which they could attain new life, his life. Christ referred to Paul in these words. In Acts 9:15, "This man is my chosen instrument to carry my name before the Gentiles and their kings, and before the people of Israel." Paul's work was a work involving great sacrifice. It involved pain. It also involved much traveling. This gives us a picture of the relation between Christ today and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and his work of forming Christ in us. Carrying his name also means or includes possessing the nature and the character of Christ. What is so hard to understand about this? What is the real reason for such public outcry by some former followers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad against the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan? Again, can agreement be reached? Yes. It is reached through patience while working for this unity. Over and again, Paul taught his followers to possess the mind of Christ. He equated this with having God's mind. He urged all to have the same mind. He wanted his followers to be one with Christ, and he taught that was being one with God. Is this not that which the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has worked with great diligence to bring about? What he teaches, from his teacher, enables the believers to grow into the mind of God Christ. Take another look into his study guides. They are keys to this divine growth. This study grows us into God's Spirit, which enables us to become patient while working for this unity. If we bring all this about Jesus and Paul down to these times, we can have better insight into these men, and these times likewise, as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad told us. If we bring what we read about Moses, Aaron, the enslaved people, etc. down to these times, we can likewise see people and these times better. I hope I have made dear what the manner of this repetition and/or finishing up of the first phase of the mission of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is, and that it is now going on in and under Minister Farrakhan. This bears witness that certain aims, purposes, and works were not yet finished when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave up the ghost, as most think, but who really departed alive in his body to be with his teacher, Master Fard Muhammad. From that lofty place and status he is continuing the next phase of his mission, as he now has that wisdom he was promised by Master Fard Muhammad. At the same time he is finishing up the first phase of his mission in the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, out of divine mercy, due to our collective rejection of him, while he was physically among us. In other words, all of us, as a people, are being given another chance by Allah to do better by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the wisdom of Allah through the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. What is being done here, via Minister Farrakhan, is also preparation for him, the minister, for his next meeting with his teacher. I am aware that there is much to be taken up to make this case more complete and even acceptable to the world. And by the help of Allah, I am trying to do just that in the larger writings. Meanwhile, reconsider the following. I tell you the truth, anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. He will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. The words, I am going to the Father indicates that final witness, written or otherwise, if it pleases Allah, cannot ultimately be done until it is finished. We find these words, it is finished, in the 19th chapter and in the 30th verse of John's Gospel. These were, so we've been told, the last words of Jesus when on the cross. Something was concluded in his life so that something else could begin for him and us all. So this witness must begin, at least with what was openly started, on July 4th, 1930. This which is being finished, through Minister Farrakhan, under the guidance of his teacher, in a certain sense, actually began when Master Fard Muhammad openly began his work on July 4th, 1930 in Detroit, Michigan, and in the next year in September through the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So, if we are living in the time, not just the ending, but in the culmination of all things, there must be a finish, at some point, to that which was yet to be finished. When the Honorable Elijah Muhammad departed in 1975, I decided that if the part of this book, which was originally a letter, was ever going to be published again, it would be necessary to try to set its context. I wanted to give the reader more of my point of view, and to try to remove the misunderstandings in the readers of those writings, which have misrepresented this work, and have misrepresented what really occurred when Minister Farrakhan rose in 1977. One day I hope to provide those who are interested a more detailed account of what occurred during those 3 days which Minister Farrakhan experienced what he did, when he read what he did, that he might do what he has so mightily done, from then to now and beyond this moment in time, by the power and the guidance of Allah. Whether or not the reader agrees with my answer, if the reader is stimulated to study further, I'm gratified and satisfied. 8 from, so what? Or they say, we wait the evil accidents of time for him. Or do they intend a plot? But those who disbelieve will be ensnared in the plot. Holy Quran, 52:30.42. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad told many of us that he expected to one day meet again with his teacher, Master Fard Muhammad. I'm aware that not everyone is interested in this subject. Many already are fixed in their view that he is physically dead. Some become irritated or even angry over this subject and, of course, feel justified. Nevertheless, there are those who wish for a fuller discussion of this subject. Moreover, sooner than most think everyone will be very interested in this subject. This chapter contains an occasion in which the Honorable Elijah Muhammad touched on his future in a manner which bears directly on the question of whether or not he is alive physically and otherwise. The following excerpt is from a chapter titled, So What?, which is from another book. In it, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad spoke, in what to me was an especially poignant, moving, and weighty manner, about his future. It's one of those experiences one has, which makes an indelible or lasting impression on one's heart. This is that excerpt. One morning in October 1966, Bami Kushmir told me of a spiritual experience, a vision, which she had during the previous night. In her vision, she saw the Honorable Elijah Muhammad under great strain and pressure. He was suffering even as he persevered in his mission. This caused her great distress. Then Master Fard Muhammad appeared, and he spoke to her. He told her that he was with his servant. He made clear that he would see him through that which he was enduring. She was comforted by his words. She related her experience to me the next morning. I do not really understand why I then saw what I did in her vision, even to this day. All I can say is that the 9th chapter of the book of Daniel, especially the part about the 70 weeks of years, is what suddenly came to my mind even as she was relating to me her experience. I wrote a letter to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and informed him of her vision and my response to it in his return letter. He acknowledged the truth of what Master Fard Muhammad told her in her vision. He said he could not go through what he was going through without the continuous and direct help of Master Fard Muhammad. Then he stated in this letter, in answer to my response to her experience, that one day he would be the object of a particular death plot from which Allah, partly through the agency of special human beings he called angels, would enable him to escape. His letter clearly indicated to me that this future effort to murder him would be greater than all of the efforts which others had, and were still making, to take his life, which went back at least to 1935. See Appendix A. It seemed clear to me, from what I felt of the spirit of his words, that this would be the greatest effort on the part of our enemies to kill him. And it was clear to me that he expected this plot and attempt to be in the future, beyond the time of his November 1966 letter. However, he confidently continued that Allah would send his angels who would come down and pick him up, rescue him, on what he called a dark and cloudy day. He also gave me chapters and verses from the Bible and the Holy Quran to study that referred to this future event. He finally wrote that he would take me further into all of this when he saw me, be it the will of Allah. I immediately studied what he gave me and then put the letter away. I thought about this subject for a few days. Then it sort of faded from my mind. Although I was blessed to see him from time to time during the next 11 months, it seems as if I had forgotten the subject. Nor did he bring it up during the times we saw each other after I received his letter of November 1966. About a year later, during one afternoon in October 1967, he told me to call the automobile insurance company with whom we were doing business. He said he wanted the captain's brother Abdullah's car and my own under his insurance policy so that we might get better rates. I did. At one point, the agent asked me of his driving situation in Chicago that I did not know. At the time of my telephone conversation with the insurance agent, he had gone up to his room. Since there was not enough time to get to him and then back to her before her office hours closed, which was within minutes, it was agreed that I would get back to her the next day. He did not come down for dinner that night. During that time I was painting his office. I was still at it the next morning when he came down for coffee. When I knew he was down and the insurance office was opened, I went to the dining room and brought him up to date on where things were about his requests. He asked me to get her on the phone. I did. Before I could leave to return to painting, he invited me to have coffee and orange juice. Of course, I accepted. I wasn't paying attention to what he was saying to her until he seemed to have a bit of difficulty remembering his age. That got my attention. I looked in his direction. After a moment of a bit of hesitancy, he said to her that he was 70 and blushed as he did so. As he hung up the phone and returned to the table, still blushing, he said to me, "You know, brother, sometimes I forget my own age." His remark triggered something that had come to me some years ago, which I had not spoken to anyone. I simply had no reason to do so. It was just one of those things which just sits in the mind of any of us, without our attaching much importance to it, which later turns out to be more significant than we had first realized. My response to his remark was unplanned, unexpected, and spontaneous. Sometime later I wondered to what extent was this simply a fortuitous event, that which happens by a fortunate accident or chance, or was it deeper? To his blushing remark, I simply commented that his age was of importance with me. I had no idea that this would open up what it did. He immediately unnerved me when his countenance suddenly became very stern and serious. He looked sharply at me as he sat down. I did not know what I had said to cause this sudden change. After he sat down, he again shot another serious glance at me. He asked me, "What do you see in my age, brother?" I said I knew there were connections between his age at certain points in his life, in certain prophecies. He continued looking at me with that same stern expression as he asked me to give him an example. I mentioned the 9th chapter of Daniel. He said, "Get my Bible." It was behind him on the T5th. As I got up to get it, I recall thinking that I did not ever recall seeing any of his Bibles downstairs, as opposed to up in his bedroom or in his office. As I picked it up, I noticed that it was the King James Version. He asked me to turn to the 9th chapter of Daniel. I did. He said, "Read it." As I looked at the 24th verse, I noticed that there were little X's besides each of the last 4 verses of that chapter. They were verses 24 through 27. I read aloud from the book of Daniel, beginning in 9:24, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks, the street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. He interrupted me with these words, "How do you see this cut off, brother?" I responded that from all I had learned from him, and from the scriptures, I knew that this referred to him, but that this did not mean death for him. I said it meant that he would go to be with Master Fard Muhammad. As I answered, his stem expression softened. While looking directly at me, he then said, "This is the most critical part of scripture with me, brother." Then he paused. He leaned back slowly in his chair. He was quiet. Then he asked me this question, "Where do you think I'm going to go, brother, and when?" It would be quite some time before I would think of the momentous significance of this question. Meanwhile, because of a lesson I learned from him in May 1961, in Phoenix, I immediately wrote my answers on the paper napkin his cook had given to me with the orange juice and coffee. To the question of where, I wrote what I thought might be 6 stopping-off places. On the way to his ultimate destination, there was a 7th stop-off place that was in my mind. I did not mention that to him until 27 months later, in January 1970, while in his home in Chicago. And I did that in private. To the when part of his question, I wrote between December 1970 and February 1971. He got up and walked to my side, cupped his hands completely over one of my ears, and blew gently. He said this was the way that Master Fard Muhammad showed him how to do when you wanted to say something to another and did not want it to get out into the air where others could pick it up. He then sat down and said to my answer to his where question, which I had written on the napkin, was, "That's a pretty good answer, brother, for Allah keeps his options open." To the when part of my response, he said, "Brother, you got it pretty near correct." Later, in June 1972, I came to realize where I was off, and that was corrected. Then there was a long pause before he said these words, with what was to me great care and deliberation. "If Allah had not shown me how I was going to escape, I would have no hope." These words were again followed by a long pause. He looked towards the ceiling up at the chandelier. He looked as if he was deciding or mulling over something. Then he leaned forward with his chin in his hands and his elbows on the table and up towards the chandelier. Finally, he slowly said, "I could tell you, brother, how it is going to happen." He paused again, glanced at me, and then looked again towards the ceiling and at the chandelier. But his pause was shorter this time, and with a slight turn of his head, he slowly continued, "But it is not necessary." I thought 2 things. I don't know which thought came first. They were, since I won't have anything to do with his escape, I didn't want to know. The other idea was that maybe he was expressing confidence in me that I wasn't going to go anywhere after he departed. In any case, what I thought made no difference. The above is the truth from one of the experiences of just one brother, in this case me, in relation to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad on a subject of immense importance. Others had theirs. Perhaps they will share them with me before Volume 2 of this book is published, be it the will of Allah. Such a book would provide the public with valuable information and insight into a man we all must get to know far better than we have, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And in so doing, we'll get an improved understanding of Minister Farrakhan. Well, after making a few more points to me, we exchanged the greetings and he dismissed me. He went on with other aspects of his work. I left the room and went back to painting his office. 88 months later, he ascended. 30 months after that, he returned, in a certain sense, in the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. But he is still alive in his own body. This ends this excerpt from the chapter So What? From Where is the Honorable Elijah Muhammad? Thank you for reading this book. The purpose of all prophecy and of all that I have shown is to tell about Jesus. Revelation 19:10, the Living Bible Appendix A, concerning a letter by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad on his escape from a death plot on the morning of June 17, 2002, I received a phone call from Sister Andrea Muhammad of Muhammad Mosque in 12, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to the effect that she received a letter from Minister Rodney Muhammad of that same mosque for me. It was the letter I referred to on page 114 of the 8th chapter of this book that was written to me by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in November 1966. I had it when I published this book in 1983 and in 1990. It did not occur to me to mention nor include it in those printings. However, I did not have this letter at the time this book was published in 2001. If I did, I would have published it in that printing, which was about double the size of the previous 2. If you notice, I did not mention, in that chapter, whether or not this letter came up in what he told me of his future escape from a death plot. The letter was not on my mind at the time of our discussion, which developed for me quite unexpectedly. Nevertheless, I was and am grateful to Allah and to him for what he did tell me. I am very thankful to Allah for blessing me that day with that letter. I hope you share this gratitude, and perhaps this letter will stimulate deeper thought over the future of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Jabril Muhammad, May 26, 2006 P.S. On June 5, 2006, I interviewed the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan on a number of topics. One of them was what he thought about my idea of placing the letter that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad sent to me back in November 1966 in this book. Here was his response. There is no witness stronger than his own witness of what he knew would come to him, except Allah. He told you in the letter that he would escape a death plot. He gave several instances of scripture that confirmed that, so our saying he's alive is strengthened by his words, and he confirms what we've been saying, that he is alive, in the face of those who say, well, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad never said nothing like that, or I never heard nothing like that, or I don't believe the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is alive. Well, here's a letter that he wrote at such and such a time in a certain context, and he bears witness that he would be taken on the heel of a death plot. Then in connection with this death plot, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad told you that, if Allah had not shown me how I was going to escape, I would have no hope. In other books to be reprinted, and in others to be published soon, be it the will of Allah, I intend to cite testimonies from Minister Farrakhan and others on this subject of the veracity of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's statement in his letter, and that he is, indeed, alive, well, and in power. In Fall of America, chapter 58, he wrote, "The disbeliever believes that which he sees present and not that which is prophesied to come." Jabril Muhammad,